For everybody who's just joining us tonight, if you don't typically watch our podcast with Mayor Weinstein, this is a special broadcast tonight concerning blatant anti-Semitism that's presently going on at the Toronto District School Board, the sanctioning, basically the shutting up of somebody who's speaking out against anti-Semitism. So we're going to talk about that a little bit very quickly, and we'll be starting momentarily, so stay tuned. This is the Never Again live podcast series. Again, this is a special report. It's not our typical show. We're going to focus on one item tonight. So moving right along, this is our show. Please do support us at israelnow.ca. Again, this is not a typical program. I'm out here in the studio monitoring things, but I'll be quiet for 99% of the program tonight and let Meir take it over as long as we have things to show, to talk about. We do have a special guest with us tonight who'll be with us later. That's David Shawn, who's the President Trump's impeachment defense team attorney. He's a lead counsel for the American victims of PLO terror attacks. He's received the Israeli Mirador Tower of Light Award, and he's the most recent, the newest director of the Zionist Organization of America. And it's an honor and a pleasure to have him with us a little bit later. Again, this is a special report, and tonight's report centers on the anti-Semitic censorship and censorship of Alexandra Lulka at the Toronto District School Board. I'm going to give a little bit of background for people who may not be totally familiar with it, but she's basically an elected person. She ran, she won, she's well respected, she's a trusted trustee of the Toronto District School Board. In her writings to the parents and to the students, she emphasized the importance of representing the needs of all students and all parents in her district and in the entire school board. In opposition to Ms. Lulka is the Javier Davila, who's the board equity advisor, and he distributed blatantly vile, blatantly anti-Semitic materials to teachers, to colleagues, administrators, associates, a far cry from advocating for all students and parents. His literature included links to the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, which is recognized as a terrorist organization by Canada and by the United States of America. This is a terrorist organization which he advocated. And if that wasn't bad enough that he promoted the PFLP, he actually, in these emails he sent out, he justified Palestinian suicide bombings. To the shock and dismay of many members of the school board and just internationally. So, in reference to this, Alexander Lulka requested an inquiry into these unsolicited racist anti-Semitic emails. Pretty straightforward, her concerns, her complaints. I don't think it could be easily contested what she had to say in a few paragraphs, just requesting to look into these emails. She was deeply disturbed that he justified suicide bombings. She was outraged by it, particularly the virulently anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic materials contained. So as a good human being, a good person, a good Jew, she asked this to be looked into. Please note that she never mentioned Palestinian, she never mentioned Muslim, and Davila himself is not Muslim, nor is he Palestinian. So how was she rewarded for this whistleblowing against a blatantly anti-Semitic racist person? So there she is, where she was campaigning for the election, won the election. So for her efforts to confront anti-Semitism and recommending she be looked into the emails. She herself is at risk of being censored this evening during a vote by the Toronto District School Board. She was censored, perhaps, and also censored as well. Censorship for saying what really needed to be said. So to investigate her concerns, the Toronto District School Board retained a legal counsel of independent investigators. Among them is Morgan Sim. So who is Morgan Sim? Morgan Sim is repeatedly referred to Jews as white. She endorses BDS. She tweets anti-Semitic posts, and to add insult to insult, she basically firmly supported the hiring of anti-Israel attorney to become the director of Toronto's Faculty of Law in the International Human Rights Program. She was not appointed, and I'm not sure that Ms. Sim ever really recovered from that. So just to summarize the events leading up to tonight's program, she also goes and shares tweets accusing Israel of intentionally targeting children. And we know that's not true. And you would expect an attorney to know better than to make these comments and to share these tweets. So basically, Ms. Lulka gave a half page regarding anti-Semitism. She was answered with a 122-page document that, in summary, called for her to be censured. I might read right from the report that, in discussing related to previous code complaint investigative reports, that advised by trustees that, in their view, a censure is the hardest penalty that can be vetted out to a trustee. Again, being censured for calling out anti-Semitism, while De Vere himself, a blatant anti-Semite, gets reinstated without any question. Fortunately, this did band together a lot of organizations, including the Never Again Live podcast in Israel Now. The 22-page document, 50 pages condemning her. So she's answered for accusing, then she's called an anti-Muslim, even though she never mentioned Muslim, she never mentioned Palestinian. And Davila himself, who blatantly confirmed his anti-Semitism, endorsement of terrorism, justification of suicide bombing, he doesn't concern the TDSB at all. There seems certainly to be a double standard going on here. So just tying up loose ends, this caught international news, including the World Israel News. B'nai B'rith, Yahoo even ran it, as well as the National Post and Canadian Journal News, all ran the story and all agree that this is blatant anti-Semitism. I just want to give everybody a background. Now I'm going to sign off for the evening, and Meir is going to take over.
Thank you very much. Every show that we have, I start with the Parsha of the week, and today is no different. So I'll get into it because it really relates to what we're talking about tonight, and it's what's going on right now is a crisis, and we'll get into that as Gary was explaining what is going on at this TDSB meeting tonight, and we have a live feed also. So in part of the show, we're going to be showing everyone who's joining us what is going on at this TDSB meeting. The chair of the meeting with the TDSB is wearing a keffiyeh. A keffiyeh. For those who don't know what a keffiyeh is, that is what the so-called resistance to Israel wears when they go to war against Israel. They don't believe Israel has a right to exist at all. Now, this parsha that's going to be read in every synagogue throughout the world this Shabbat is it's called V'yigash. And in this parsha, it's very nice. The brothers of Yosef reconcile. Joseph explains to his brothers, I'm your brother. You might not recognize me. You don't, you're coming from Israel here to Egypt because of the famine. And Egypt is now a superpower. We're selling food products everywhere. People are coming to us. So he reconciles with his brothers, and he's concerned about his father, Yaakov. And Yaakov, then he's coming to Egypt to meet with Joseph, who he thought he died. He thought he was dead for so many years. So you can imagine the feeling, the emotion that occurs when they finally meet. And it says in this parsha, it says, and Joseph met his father in Goshen, in Egypt, and Joseph fell on his father's neck and he wept. And the rabbis comment on this. They say that Yaakov did not weep. He's not stone cold or anything like that. It says, Yaakov said Shema when this encounter happened, the declaration of faith. The question is, why didn't Yaakov weep? It's a human emotion. Obviously, he thinks his son, and that was his favorite also, was dead, hasn't seen him in years. He finally has the opportunity to embrace him. He sees he's not only is he doing well, he's thriving. He's the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. He doesn't weep. There's obviously a lot of emotion going on there. And he says, Shema, what's going on? What is going on? Should be obvious to everyone. And unfortunately, it really isn't. The light doesn't go on. History repeats itself. Yaakov is one of the fathers. He knows what the promise of God is. He knows what the destiny of the Jewish people is supposed to be in Israel, what we're supposed to be doing. He descends with his family to Egypt. And he knows the famine is going to be temporary. But the family and the Jewish people descending into Egypt, it's not going to be so simple to get them to return out of Egypt and go back to Israel and start building a nation there. And so he weeps for that reason. Look at what's going on in the world. Look at what happened in Egypt. The Jews, they felt a sense of security because after all, Joseph, he was the second most powerful person in Egypt. It does say in the Torah that the Egyptians despised the Jews. They did. But when you're the second most powerful person in Egypt, you feel the sense of security that we're untouchables for a certain period of time. And as will happen in the next parsha, we'll see that, and there arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And things changed. Gradually they changed, but it went pretty quick, actually. Jews in Germany, they wanted to be the best Germans there were. They gave up their beliefs. They fully assimilated into German life. They excelled. They fought in the German army in World War I, in fact. They had decorations. The Holocaust happened there. Everywhere in the world. Celebrate Hanukkah in London, England. Jews take a bus downtown London. They want to light the menorah. They're attacked. They're attacked. They're attacked everywhere in the world. What's going on right now? University of Toronto made a statement today on the issue of anti-Semitism. They officially rejected the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. They are giving a license to BDS groups on campus to accuse Jews who support Israel of being worse than the Nazis, of being evil incarnate. And when you demonize people to that extent, just like the Nazis did in Nazi Germany and Europe, then the Jewish people become expendable. It's fair game. That's what's going on. The TDSB. The chair of the meeting tonight is wearing a keffiyeh. That's what the PLO wear. And everyone who follows the PFLP and Hamas. And no one says anything. A Jewish trustee makes a statement against anti-Semitism and support for the PFLP by a teacher, and she is censored. She is being punished, and that's what this meeting is about tonight with the Toronto District School Board. We will zoom into it pretty soon as well. Let me bring on Ron East first. That's monitoring it right now on a second.
Yeah, let's tune into it right now. There's a great lady speaking a little bit about
Bring
it.
us up to speed with it. What's going on right now?
Well, right now they're having Colleen Russell Rawlings, Director of Education, speaking about the whole issue of safety and for students, fighting against hate and discrimination, talking about the issues that recently have happened with global perspective. I think they're warming up towards the main issue of today. If we want to turn in, she's talking about Palestinians right now. If we can just tune in, Gary. Gary?
To ensuring your identities and experiences.
Yes,
Can we turn it in?
Let me tune into it. We'll get that on.
I recognize for many of you, you do not yet feel safe in
She's talking about
acknowledging
Palestinians. She's talking about Palestinians here.
to learning to eliminate anti-Palestinian racism.
Sure.
The negative impacts of hate and racism in all its insidious forms, whether it's ableism, anti-Asian hate, anti-Black racism, anti-South Asian racism, transphobia, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Indigenous racism, stand as a barrier to our primary goal of creating engaging learning environments where every student feels respected, heard, and understood. We cannot solve the conflicts of the world in the classrooms of the TDSB, but we can foster an environment of open dialogue with the goal of creating a better understanding of the diverse and differing views present across our communities on important issues. That will not be easy. We will need the support of those members of the TDSB community and beyond who not only believe in this vision, but who also want to collaborate on an action-driven approach, and who believe that we can collectively make it a reality for all students. I've already committed to the following actions, but I think that they're important to reiterate this evening. We will appoint an internal staff writing team for up to 7 months to support, complement, and augment the development of resources on these issues and identities. We will offer professional learning modules on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in addition to other forms of discrimination, and seek out guidance from external bodies, including the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Tonight, I announce that staff will also develop a strategy that should unite us all, and that is a plan to educate and prevent the spread of hate, which is on the rise online, in Ontario, in our communities, and sadly in some of our schools. In sowing the seeds of division, hate stealthily cultivates the ground to threaten our very existence, regardless of identity. We must act. Coalitions for Justice offer windows of hope in difficult times. If we can empower our students with the understanding that learning about one form of oppression does not diminish the struggle and suffering of others, we can lay the foundation of understanding we need to build a community of belonging and truly achieve equity across our entire board. For that dialogue to begin, I would implore everyone to listen first to the views that are not your own, and to reach for an understanding that may have been beyond your grasp in the past. We must embrace and celebrate our differences. Yes, sometimes we will passionately disagree, but we must remember that whatever differences may divide us, we have a shared humanity that can bring us together in our hallways, our classrooms, and shared spaces for one reason, for one really good reason, our children's futures. This will be a long and difficult road to navigate. Racism and hate will surely serve as detours on our journey. Our actions will be imperfect and perhaps even fall short on occasion. But what we should always be guided by is the shared purpose of our students, the shared purpose of the students we have the privilege of educating. Collectively, we have the responsibility to raise critical and independent thinkers who feel confident in their identities and have the ability to uphold the dignity and human rights of others. This is a goal worth striving for, even in the face of adversity and opposition, over and over again. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on these important issues with you this evening. As I conclude my leadership report, I would also like to touch briefly on other items, if I may. I recently had the opportunity to see the impact of digital literacy skills when I met 3 young students.
I think we can now put her away
Ben
and monitor
again. And Matthew, who are 10, 11, and 12 years old respectively.
We can put her in the back. We can put her in the
Science
background now and come back when they talk about. But here you go, the laying the foundation. You know, poor Palestinian students.
The
they're
management
suffering.
app is designed to help students, parents, and teachers stay organized.
But I'll keep on listening, Meir, and see what else comes up. And when we have the next item that's important to us, I'll chime back in. In the meantime, you know, I'm just outraged like you at seeing the keffiyeh being worn by the chair of the board, or at least the chair of this meeting. And it sends a very strong message to the Jewish community out there, exactly where he stands and where his views are and where he's going to vote when it comes to the censoring portion of the
Absolutely.
and if that's not bias, I don't know what is.
I'm wondering if David Stone is on right now. Has he linked up? Logged in? There he is. There he is. Good. David, how are you doing?
Okay, thanks. How are you?
Very good. I mean, it's unbelievable what is going on. I know across the border of the United States, you're experiencing all of this as well on campuses and in schools. But here, you know, we have a connection right now, a live feed going with a meeting that's going on at TDSB, and I'm not too sure if I've sent you some material on it. But in short, a Jewish trustee exposed anti-Semitism in the public school system and support for the PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. As a result, there was an investigation made on her, an over 50-page report trying to censor her, take measures against her. The Jewish community is united to fight this. And tonight, there is an actual vote going on right now as we speak to decide what the fate of this Jewish trustee should be. Can you believe this is happening right now?
Yeah, I followed it. You know, there's a particular irony today when you mentioned about the United States. There's the New York City Police Commissioner, as you may know, today issued a report just several hours ago, noting that a great threat in New York right now is hate crimes, violent hate crimes against Asians and Jews, with anti-Semitic hate crime incidents up 51% this year. And he, quite frankly, put the blame on what they call liberal policy, bail reforms and that sort of thing. I put the blame squarely to a great extent on the hate squad in Congress, quite frankly, which raises another tremendous irony. The hate squad mobilized today to move for sanctions against this Lauren Boebert for a comment she made about Ilhan Omar. And they're all outraged in this hate squad about those comments, with no mention in the media of the virulent anti-Semitic, bigoted comments Omar and the whole hate squad make on a daily basis without any punishment whatsoever.
So they want to censor her, but anything Ilhan Omar does is fine. She's never censored. She's never pushed off any committee, no nothing. But you say something against her, and they spin it and they say it's an Islamophobic attack. Therefore, we have to get rid of you.
Yeah, it's the same story. It's a circle. She and AOC and the others make these horrible, horrible comments that lead to violence against Jews. And then they scream bloody murder, that they're getting bad press or bad comments from people, and now they're scared for their lives and all of that. It's just really unbelievable that we put up with this.
One of the spokeswoman for CARE, she recently, what's her name? Zara Balou. She attended a conference just last week by the American Muslims for Palestine. And she was very clear about her anti-Semitism and going after targeting Jewish organizations and synagogues as well. And she has connections with Islamic groups in Canada as well. No censor to her. She's given a platform. I haven't heard one Islamic leader in North America condemn her.
Yeah, I'm not, quite frankly, I'm not hearing enough from Jewish leaders condemning this kind of rhetoric. Mort Klein does, but I'm not hearing it from others, quite frankly. And, listen, CARE has been getting away with this stuff for, as long as one can remember. It's unbelievable. I mean, they were mainstreamed into the White House in two previous administrations ago. So it's abhorrent, but the media doesn't want to call it straight. And, everyone's scared of their shadows to call it just what it is.
Virulent anti-Semitism. The University of Toronto today, they issued a statement on anti-Semitism. They have no problem with Jews having kosher food on campus. Let's get that out there already. Like, nice guys.
Yeah.
But they rejected the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to go around throughout the campus and call Jews who support Israel, compare them to the Nazis or worse than the Nazis, demonize them, make them subject to attack because they are the worst of the worst in the entire world, and therefore there's nothing wrong with attacking them.
Yeah, they like the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. That's about the extent of it.
Right.
And,
right. It's just okay. So hang on, I got a notification from Ron East. Maybe there's something going on with the meeting right now. So hang on. Gary, can we bring Ron into the screen also?
Commissioner Craig will provide an overview of
So the chair of the meeting at the CDSP is wearing a keffiyeh.
To trustees' questions and comments. I'm going to allow Trustee Lalka to speak first, to make a statement, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers after that. After the discussion is finished, the board will need to make a determination about the content of the report, and I'll provide a little more direction in detail when we get to that point. So I will now ask Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig to present the report to us tonight.
Thank you, Chair Brown. Chair Brown and members of the board, thank you for your attention. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the complaint investigation report before you. As I've set out in the preamble to the report before you on page 1, I wish to clarify the limits of my role as Integrity Commissioner for the board. My office was created in 2015, as you know, to be an arm's length independent accountability officer with the integrity regime. That included then the newly adopted board member code of conduct, setting out the rules of conduct for members of the board to follow, the complaint protocol, setting out the complaint investigation process, and the integrity commissioner with various duties set out in her agreement with the board. I'm an arm's length fact finder to whom you, the board, have delegated the receipt and investigation of code complaints. And upon finding a breach, I make recommendations to the Board of Trustees, and you are the decision maker under the Education Act, and you decide whether to accept or to reject or to vary my recommendations. To be clear, I am the fact finder and investigator, and you are the decision maker. There is much that requires careful consideration in the matter subject of this report before you. The context within which the conduct I have reviewed came about is the context. It is the background. It is not the substance of the complaint or the task that I have before me. So what is the context? During the May 2021 unrest in the area plagued by violence, a mail-out was distributed by an employee of the TDSB, which led to a trustee making comments which are the basis of the complaints subject to this report. The task at hand, receiving the Integrity Commissioner's investigation report and adopting or not the recommendations. What is the role of the Municipal Integrity Commissioner at council or a school board? Very briefly, one political accountability expert has said, Mr. David W. Arbuckle, in his view of the high-profile case in the city of Vaughan involving the former deputy mayor, highlights that no matter how comprehensive the code rules are, there will on occasion be situations where the ethical course of action for elected officials is not clear, and an individual will need authoritative advice and guidance. Arbuckle goes on to say there is no universally understood definition of accountability. The most important function of a municipal accountability officer is to provide much needed guidance for potential council candidates, in this case the board, and for conscientious citizens. In addition, in a 2016 divisional court decision, Justice Morocco, writing for the panel, identified the statutory scheme governing the Integrity Commissioner. The Integrity Commissioner is subject to a statutory scheme set out in the Municipal Act, for you, the Education Act, and there is a statutory regime of a code of conduct, complaint protocol, and the policies of the organization. This investigation of the report before you, subject to the code of conduct, is about the respondent trustees' comments and whether these were in breach of the code rules set out in the complaints that came to this office. This complaint investigation is not about the staff person's conduct vis-a-vis sending out mailouts and materials. This investigation is not about the review of those materials or whether the TDSB should address the situation that ensued following the mailout. This investigation is not about the definition of terms under the human rights policies of your board. Should you, the board, or the administration want to turn your minds to these very important topics, it is certainly your prerogative. However, all of the above are not within my purview to determine. I stated in the report before you that I would not, because it's not my role, analyze whether the mailouts were appropriate or whether there should have been greater oversight and control over the materials that were distributed. However, I do state in the report before you that I have decided, as part of my investigative discretion, that in order to give thoughtful treatment to the complaints that I was tasked with investigating under the approved policies of the board, I could not operate in a vacuum, which views integrity commissioners as inflexible, unable to navigate nuanced discussions that touch on real life issues. Nor did I go beyond my jurisdiction and wade into operational discourse of the board. My role is to review the conduct of a member of the board under the code. The complaints I investigated came about within the context of two pivotal issues. The first, what information should be included when teaching about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? The answer to this question does not fall within the jurisdiction of my office. However, I found that in the gap created by an absence of an informed and reasonable discussion in the departments tasked with the oversight and expertise on such issues, students, teachers, trustees, and the public reached out to my office seeking a resolution to this issue that is appropriately addressed by board administration, not the Integrity Commissioner. Many scholarly and journalistic articles contain unbiased information that, together with an informed guide to the readings, could provide an appropriate treatment of the subject matter. However, many articles written by experts in the subject area contain hurtful perspectives and words that trigger decade-long misconceptions that feed into stereotypes. That was the first pivotal issue that bracketed the context of the complaint. The second pivotal issue that formed the context within which the actions were subject to the complaint came forward was the language and content that should be included in definitions of discriminatory terms. Not for this office to determine. However, this is the second pivotal issue, and it formed part of what I had to deal with in the investigation of the complaint. So the two pivotal issues that bookended the context within which the complaints came forward were both unclear and subject to various perspectives at the board. My office received two formal complaints that were substantively similar in issues raised. After conducting a preliminary classification pursuant to the complaint protocol, I determined that I would conduct one complaint investigation. The report before you presents the investigative findings of the Integrity Commissioner on three issues. The first issue, the allegation. The respondent undertook an act of discrimination and harassment through the posting of the respondent's Twitter statement, which was alleged to have supported and perpetuated several harmful and recurring closed views of stereotypes about Palestinians and/or Muslims. That was the first issue. The second issue, the allegation. By publicly posting a statement on social media about a TDSB employee, the respondent is alleged to have used her influence of office to improperly influence the board's decision in respect of the disciplinary action of a staff person. That was issue number two. Issue number three, the allegation. The respondent's Twitter statement asserted that the resources of a staff person provided in a student mail-out were anti-Semitic, thereby, the complaints allege, maliciously and falsely injuring the professional reputation of the staff person. That was issue number three. On issue number one, upon review of all information received during my investigation, I relied on the independent investigator's conclusion, and I found that the respondent's conduct posting the Twitter statement fell within the TDSB's definition of being discriminatory and did breach Rule 6.10. I found that the respondent's Twitter statement did not constitute harassment. With respect to issue number two, I concluded on a balance of probabilities the respondent's conduct did not breach Rule 6.9b of the code. I set out in the report that the respondent should not have retweeted a media article that took an entrenched position on a matter that likely at the time of the tweet would be subject of a future internal review. Although the Twitter statement of the respondent carries the weight of a trustee with the credibility afforded that role, I found during the investigation that the statement was not intended to, nor did it improperly influence TDSB staff to open an investigation or to conclude it in any particular way. On issue number three, due to a lack of consensus at the board, I found on this issue, I was unable to reach a conclusion about whether the actions of the respondent constituted a breach of Rule 6.9a, which states that all members of the board must refrain from maliciously or falsely injuring the professional reputation of a staff member. In particular, this report deals with Rule 6.10a, and I'm going to just very briefly read it to you because it is important. It is a two-pronged rule. Sub B has a bifurcated process. Sub A of Rule 6.10 says, all members of the board have a duty to treat members of the public, one another, staff members, respectfully without abuse, bullying, or intimidation to ensure that their work environment is free from discrimination and harassment. This provision applies to all forms of written and oral communication, including social media. The free from discrimination and harassment then forms the substance of Part B of this rule. And Part B states, harassing or discriminatory behavior as indicated in the TDSB workplace harassment prevention and human rights policies and the Ontario Human Rights Code, which occurs in the course of or is related to the performance of the official business and duties of the board member, is subject to this code. And then there is the bifurcated process. If the Integrity Commissioner receives a complaint, after an initial assessment, which I did conduct, they, the Integrity Commissioner, shall, so I have no discretion here, consult with the TDSB Human Rights Office and then determine the appropriate next steps including referral to an independent investigator. So what's the process leading up to the investigation of this cold complaint? On May 16th and May 19th, as you know, materials concerning the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, primarily focused on the Palestinian experience and perspective, also including some materials on anti-Semitism, were consolidated or curated into a resource package by the staff person, a student equity program advisor at the TDSB, and circulated through an opt-in mail-out. The staff person who curated the materials advised that he had contacted the HRO, the Human Rights Office of the TDSB, around May 21st, because a journalist had contacted him to say that she would be writing an article about the materials in the mail-out that she believed to be anti-Semitic. Originally, the staff person said the HRO found nothing anti-Semitic in the materials. However, at a subsequent meeting, the staff person says he was told by the HRO that they had not had a chance to read most of the materials prior to the first meeting, and thus on a quick skim of the materials, determined they didn't seem to be anti-Semitic, but rather were naming marginalization and oppression, which is supportive of human rights. The HRO said that all of the materials would have to be reviewed fully before a statement could be made about whether the materials were anti-Semitic. The respondent to this complaint, the trustee, also advised my office that she had contacted the HRO about concerns that she had when she saw these materials. She had spoken to the interim director of education, and the interim director had referred her to the HRO. The HRO conducted an assessment of the main materials in the mail-out, and in June, the 4th of June in particular, issued a document that stated, with the exception of some links, the materials do not express hatred, and I am quoting from that document, do not express hatred or criticism towards Jews as an ethnic group or as a creed or religion, and then in brackets state, please note that we reviewed the content of the main articles included in the mailouts, but did not review the links with those articles, nor did we review the books, websites, videos, podcasts. So let's talk about the investigation for a moment as it related to discrimination. Upon commencing investigation of this office, and after having spoken with the respondent pursuant to the protocol, I wrote to the HRO on June 25th to advise that I've received code complaints that raised Rule 610 harassment and discrimination. As a result of consultations with the HRO in this office, I engaged a specific third-party investigator. Regarding discrimination in employment, the Ontario Human Rights Code states every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to employment without discrimination because, and it states all of the grounds. Discrimination is not defined in the Ontario Human Rights Code, but is defined in the TDSB policies, and I operated and the investigator operated with that definition. So what were these mailouts that the respondent tweeted about and are subject of the findings of this report? On May 16th and May 19th of this year, materials were distributed through, as I said, an opt-in mailing list that I refer to throughout the report before you as the May mailouts. On May 22nd, an article by a journalist was published in the Toronto Sun under the title Virulent Anti-Israel Manual Sent to TDSB Teachers. The article named the staff person and described the May mailouts as anti-Semitic. On May 23rd, the respondent retweeted the Toronto Sun article and wrote a statement which I have reproduced in the appendices to the report before you. The staff person identified that the intended purpose of the May mailouts was to focus on the topic of the then ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This topic was chosen, he advised my office, because the issue was in the news and teachers had asked the staff person for resources to discuss the issue with their students. The staff person said that the May mailouts, in particular the May 19th mailout, was to provide teachers with, and I quote, resources which center Palestinian voices and speak to the experience of Palestinians in the context of the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That was the stated purpose. Information and education. As I've said to you, my role is not to determine the appropriateness of the mailouts. but it is important to note that the stated purpose, as also identified by the HRO, was educational. Both the main mailouts have the following preamble. I won't read all of it, but it states an opt-in mailout that includes resources, event announcements, and other news articles related to gender-based violence prevention, sexual violence prevention, and healthy relationships using a critical, anti-racist, intersectional, and decolonial framework that call out anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. The staff person explained that, and I quote, I look at whether the sources specifically center marginalized voices. That is really important. My job is not to replicate the story often told in the media. So both the May 16th and 19th mailouts included item number 12, and this is important, which is continuously, in quotation, a continuously updated master list of sources on Palestine, resources that include various researchers, scholars, academic authors. And the staff person stated, in respect of the disclaimer, I've read many of these links, but not all. Many are from well-known scholars, historians, and journalists. The articles I've read use critical race praxis and are transparent and intentional about calling out anti-Semitism. Read these with a critical anti-racist lens and ensure credibility and intersectional anti-oppressive frameworks that are used to clear analysis of power. The teachers, according to the staff person who curated these resources, are supposed to use their professional judgment when using this body of work. So looking at the statement and how it is discriminatory, as I found in this report, the respondent saw her tweet as a communication to her constituents, and thus part of the performance of her official duties. I have relied on the analysis of the independent investigator and their assessment and analysis of the HRO in reaching my conclusion on the issue of discrimination. While the trustee's Twitter statement may not specifically identify Palestinians or Muslims, the conclusion of the independent investigator set out that it does appear to perpetuate negative stereotypes about both of these groups when it suggests, without reference to actual materials, that the materials in the May mailouts, which included academic scholarly articles and were designed to center Palestinian voices and perspectives, justify suicide bombings and other forms of terrorism. The complaints alleged that it is Islamophobic to link Palestinian human rights, the focus of the materials, with suicide bombing and terrorism.
Sorry about that.
The complaint stated, in linking materials curated to center Palestinian voices and human rights to terrorism and suicide bombings, the trustee's Twitter statement had the effect of erasing, negating, or discounting the humanity of Palestinian students and their supporters. While the independent investigator was not engaged to determine if the staff person breached the human rights policies of the TDSB, or whether the materials in the May mailouts were anti-Semitic, they did review the May mailouts, not all the linked materials, and more importantly, the independent investigator also relied on the HRO's review and assessment of the May mailouts. The HRO concluded, and I may be repeating myself, but I will reiterate, our collective assessment of the main articles that we read, with the exception of the links, is that they do not express hatred or criticism of Jews as an ethnic group or as a creed or religion. The main articles, state the HRO statement, are critiques of Israel and highlight the harms caused by the policies and actions of the government. We, the HRO states, don't believe that criticisms of the actions of the Israeli state, government, and army are inherently anti-Semitic. The conclusions: that the materials were mischaracterized and in effect were created to center the voices of marginalized Palestinians, in particular children, and to assist educators in understanding and discussing the Palestinian struggle. One student, many of whom provided input, stated as it related to the respondent through tweets, risk making Palestinians and Muslims feel unheard and or unwanted. It made me, along with multiple other students, uncomfortable. You paid no mind to the Palestinian or Islamic struggle, but you did thoroughly mention the Israeli and Jewish struggle. With issue number 2, and whether the respondent's Twitter statement and the retweeting of the Toronto Sun article improperly influenced or attempted to influence the board's decision in respect of the disciplinary action of the staff person in contravention of Rule 9, I found the respondent formulated comments appropriately on a publicly accessible social media page, and that it followed by a significant number of individuals, and can also be viewed by staff internal to the TDSB who may have carriage of the review of actions of a staff person. However, based on all the information I received, the respondent's request for an investigation, in my view, was not directed at staff in respect of seeking a review of a particular staff person, but rather regarding a review of what processes of the TDSB would allow, or could even allow, hurtful and anti-Semitic materials to be distributed to students. The respondent, in my view, should not have attempted to solicit an investigation by way of Twitter. Based on the information that I received during this code investigation, however, the decision to conduct an investigation had already been made by staff prior to the respondent's Twitter post. The Board of Trustees, we should remember, trustees is a collective. You make decisions on board policies as a collective. The proper forum for you or any trustee to address concerns about board processes is at a session with the full board or the relevant committee. Of relevance to this position that I take is the legislative role set out in the Hall report. And I just quote, while the discipline of an employee, with the exception of the Director of Education, does not reside with the jurisdiction of the board, the trustees may, as a collective, vote to direct the Director of Education to commence an investigation without comment on their desired outcome. My analysis of Rule 6.9b of the code does not require me to conclude whether the Twitter and Facebook postings did in fact influence staff. Rather, I must conclude whether the respondent intended to influence or intended to attempt to influence the investigative process, and I find that she did not. I find that she did not breach Rule 6.9b of the code. With reference to issue number 3, as I set out in the report, I find there is insufficient information to determine whether the respondent falsely injured the reputation of the staff person, because all of the materials in the May mailouts were not reviewed by the HRO. I do find that there was no evidence of malicious intent on the part of the respondent. In conclusion, in the report before you, first, the subjective intent or the understanding of the respondent is not a factor in the assessment of whether her conduct is discriminatory. It is for this reason that the independent investigator did not factor the respondent's intent into their analysis. They performed their analysis on the basis of the May mailouts that were sent out, relying on the HRO's determination that some of the materials may be considered anti-Semitic, but that the stated purpose of the staff person in curating the mailout was educational. Second, the independent investigator found that the respondent's use of some, with reference to a subset of the materials justifying suicide bombings and other forms of terrorism, was insufficient to change the discriminatory effects of the respondent's statement. The independent investigator advised that in human rights law, the first step in the discrimination analysis is to consider the effect of the conduct or statement of the individuals who claim offense. A trustee may absolutely voice her opinion, especially with respect to calling out anti-Semitism. However, a trustee cannot perpetuate harmful anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian tropes by tying generally pro-Palestinian discourse to anti-Semitism and violence. I tender this complaint investigation report to the Board of Trustees for your consideration, and I make the recommendation of a censure in respect to issue number 1. I find no breach in respect to issue number 2, and cannot make findings with respect to issue number 3. In discussions related to previous code complaint investigation reports, I have been advised
by some trustees that in your view, a censure is the harshest penalty that can be meted out to a trustee. I don't agree with that position. A censure or a reprimand is a strong condemnation of an action or statement of a trustee who's been found to have breached the code. But in my view, a censure in the Education Act is a lesser sanction than removal of being a chair or removal from a committee or suspension from attendance at a committee or board meeting. I do not recommend that the respondent face any of these higher sanctions available under the Education Act. And with that, I conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Integrity Commissioner Craig. So we'll now move to the section where we have questions and answers or comments.
Partially.
And I'm going to
But we have the picture.
to take the floor so she can make
Someone must have told them to take it off.
And just to remind everyone, we are still following our time limits. We have 5 minutes each. Go ahead.
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? As a Jewish trustee, I have the right and the responsibility to myself, my constituents, my ancestors, my community, and my own daughter to name and condemn anti-Semitism wherever I witness it. I will never stop calling out anti-Semitism. And that is what I did when I saw hateful anti-Semitism being promoted in our school board. As a Jewish educator and as a Jewish school board trustee, I am unfortunately well versed in anti-Semitic tropes. As a Jewish child, I learned to recognize anti-Semitism because, like many Jews in Toronto, I have been its target. So when certain materials sent out to TDSB educators tout the legitimacy of groups that Canada designates as terrorist organizations, or describe the murder of Jews at nightclubs, pizza shops, or at prayer as forms of resistance, I'm going to do what anyone in my position ought to and is expected to do. I'm going to name and shame those materials for the hateful, repulsive, and violent bigotry that they are. I'm not going to mince words or add caveats. No other community would be expected to do so. May of 2021 bore witness to the most traumatic wave of anti-Semitism seen in the Jewish diaspora since the Second World War. Jews around the world were targeted in a vicious and frightening tidal wave of hate. In Toronto, the UJA recorded an alarming almost 500% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in May of 2021 alone. It was in that context that a TDSB employee distributed materials, some of which contained anti-Semitism and or supported the use of violence and terrorism against Israeli Jews. One particular resource justified the use of suicide bombings as legitimate resistance. The materials linked directly to a website affiliated with the PFLP, and they contained elements which conferred legitimacy on Hamas, two groups that are currently on Canada's list of terrorist entities. Legitimization of terrorism should be a red line for us all. Faced with the horrifying prospect of these materials being distributed to TDSB educators with the intent that they be used in the classroom, I spoke up. All of us should call out hate when we see it in unambiguous terms. Each of us must send an unequivocal message when hate is directed against any group, that it is intolerable and does not reflect the values of this institution without exception. We are living at a time of rising hate and polarization, one which requires moral clarity from our leaders. The Integrity Commissioner notes that upon review of the May mailouts, some of the materials did justify suicide bombings and other forms of terrorism. Furthermore, the report finds that any reasonable person reviewing the May mailouts would understand the respondents' comments to be constrained to the offensive materials. I wrote the truth about an important issue in a way that reasonable people would understand. Despite this, the complaint that sparked this investigation fundamentally mischaracterized my statement. This complaint was intended to silence me. I will not be silenced. This complaint alleged that I conflated Palestinians with terrorism. That is completely false. I made no such conflation. I only called out what was in the materials. If a conflation was made, it was not made by me. The complaint alleged that my statement was false, that there was no anti-Semitism in the materials. This report clearly states that everything that I said in my statement was true. This complaint attempts to silence Jewish voice, to speak over Jews when it comes to anti-Jewish hate. Why is it that Jews seem to be the only minority group that doesn't get to define our own oppression?
Absolutely.
I'm proud to stand with the unanimous indignation of every single mainstream Jewish organization in the city of Toronto, every one of them agreeing that these heinous materials contravene the definitions of anti-Semitism the TDSB is obliged by our own policy to uphold. I am proud to stand with these organizations. I'm proud to stand up for my constituents. I'm proud to stand up for my community, my family, and for my daughter. To my community and my constituents, I hear you and I thank you. This has been a difficult 7 months to bear the weight of this investigation in private, but I am glad this has finally come out in the open. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to confront this together and to find a way to move forward. Maria Montessori said that establishing lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. We as educators have a responsibility to build peace. The reason we are here today is because some of these materials distributed did not do that. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. This board must do better. The Integrity Commissioner noted, whether there were 3 articles in links or main material that contained anti-Semitic materials or 50, even one article with anti-Semitic materials is too many. And yet, the perception is that the TDSB has thus far failed to present this same moral clarity in word or in deed. The TDSB has been losing the trust of the Jewish community. We now have an opportunity to either dig that hole deeper or begin a constructive path forward. A vote to censure this evening is not that path forward, and frankly, would say a lot more about this board than it would say about me. I will be calling for a recorded vote for any motion arising from this report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lalka. And good timing. Now, the floor is open to other trustees who would like to make comments or ask questions to the Integrity Commissioner on the content of the report.
Good evening, Chair. Just like clarification, this is Trustee Patel.
Yes, go ahead.
So questions of clarification, does that include in your 5 minutes or it's separate? Because I think you cannot come back on a speaker's list if I'm not wrong.
No, we all get one shot to ask questions or make comments for 5 minutes at a board meeting. That's correct.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have some questions for Integrity Commissioner if you allow me to speak on this.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig, the HRO office, and anybody who is involved with this investigation. We all know this is a complex issue. This issue is not as straightforward as we think. But we need to understand 2 things in this report. And what does the report consist of? One is an issue which has a gray area. And the other issue is a code of conduct. And that code of conduct is our institution. We are bound to that institution. We are all 22 of us are obligated to follow that code of conduct. Don't get me wrong. I feel for Trustee Lulka. I feel for my Jewish community, my friends in the Jewish community. This is not about the Palestinian Jewish issue right now. This is about a code of conduct. This report talks about code of conduct. What is our limitation as a trustees? What can we do? What can we not do? The issue which is faced by Trustee Lulka, I have faced in my community twice.
What happened?
God has smitten him and shut him down. Well, while that's happening, you guys want to have a little conversation? We'll bring him back on if his voice comes back again. How's that sound?
Sure. So, David, what do you? I've seen some of the comments that you've said. We're talking about also when it comes to terrorist organizations, material support is illegal. What do you make of this?
I mean, it's like a clown show. I mean, you have the so-called integrity commissioner speaks in the third person, saying that while some of the materials were anti-Semitic, it's okay because they were intended for education purposes. Okay, let's see. So Goebbels was kind of a bad guy, except he meant to educate people with what he was saying. So that really wasn't so bad. That's number one, according to her. Number two is, yeah, I mean, I think if a quasi-public official is transmitting materials that indicate support for PFLP, Hamas, and so on, he walks a pretty close line for material support for terrorism, for outlawed groups. But based on Ms. Loco's description of things, this isn't a close call. I mean, this is something. If she didn't out them for what they were, then the entire educational pursuit in this district would be undermined. It's pretty shocking stuff. It shouldn't be shocking, I guess, but it is.
And when they're trying to censor her, saying that the fact that you are calling this out, support for the PFLP, anti-Semitism, that they spin it and say, this is offensive to Muslims. This is Islamophobia.
Yeah.
This seems like the beginning of getting ready for second class or third class status for Jews.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. Again, we hear it all the time from the hate squad that let's just deal with facts. If we're dealing with facts, those facts are then perceived by them because the underlying truth is uncomfortable. Those facts are perceived by them as, discriminatory or unfair or whatever, but they're the facts. I mean, the idea that they think it's absolutely shocking that someone would link suicide bombings with Palestinian terrorism. If that's shocking to them, then they lose all credibility from the outset of it. I'm laughing, but it's not funny, of course. It's a very serious thing,
Fully understand. Yeah. Ron, do you want to chime in a little bit? You're paying attention to everything going on.
Listen, I'm still listening to it. The phone just died, so I'm trying to connect it back in. We'll be connected again in a minute. This is astonishing.
Right.
This is astonishing. If I wasn't watching this live, I wouldn't believe you if you told me this was happening. I don't understand what only some links. What's the amount of links that need to be into an anti-Semitic propaganda material to qualify for being anti-Semitic? Isn't one link too many? Isn't one link to terrorism one link too many? Right. Now we've got a quota. There need to be so many links attached in order for it to be considered anti-Semitic.
And it only applies to Jews.
Only applies to Jews. Of course, it's a double standard that goes on and on and on. It doesn't end. But let me get back to try and get it back on, and then I'll continue.
Okay. I mean, I feel it's like we're entering the 1930s again. That the rights of Jews are being stripped away, and we're not allowed to speak our minds, speak the truth, and get used to being a minority and a persecuted minority at that.
Maximum cancel culture and rewriting history, rewriting a narrative. And if that's educational, then we're in big trouble.
I mean, thank God we got the Jewish state. In the 1930s, and that we didn't have that. There was no refuge. But again, thank God we have a Jewish state that's strong and successful and thriving and growing and all the time. I think they in fact say right now that the Israeli economy or the shekel is the strongest currency in the world right now, or something like that. But when you look at what's going on in diaspora communities with the attacks in London, England against Jews celebrating Hanukkah, downtown London, almost every campus, Jews are being targeted violently. We had attacks, Jews sitting in patios outside at restaurants being attacked. So many synagogues being attacked with anti-Semitic graffiti and bombs and guns, and there's a list it's unbelievable what's going on right now. It's out of control. And then
we just had a stabbing and shooting in Jerusalem also. It's
of a 15-year-old Arab girl who stabbed a mother taking her kids to school. And where do these kids these 15-year-olds learn this from? Well, if this is, we're talking about the TDSB, the public school system in Toronto, which represents public schools in any other city, and if they want to legitimize the PFLP and make light of it, and anti-Semitism, make light of it, you're going to see more kids here and in the States get involved with that and potentially go out there and start attacking Jews.
Yep. Yeah, the kids, they learn what they live. I think I may have told you the story before. I was walking down the street with my daughter during this COVID period, and a couple small kids from a house came running out screaming, saying, "Don't stay away, stay away. It's the Jews. They bring us COVID." So on my way back on the walk, the parents were at the doorway. So I said, "Do you know what your kids just said?" So I told them. They said, "Oh, I don't know where they got that from." I just said, "Yeah, I can't imagine where they got it from." I walked on.
Right. Right. No, 100%. Wow. And that's right. It's been throughout the on social media, accusing Jews of being responsible for the pandemic.
Yeah, you name it, they blame the Jews for it. That's for sure.
Every single thing. Everything.
But this is a serious situation, because you're talking about an official school board. Not just an official arm of government, but a place dedicated, toward the education, setting policy for the education of children, the next generation. It's abominable. The question is, will anyone else other than Ms. Loka speak out in her favor on this thing, on that board?
Yeah, we're waiting for the connection to go, be hooked up again. But no, 100%. 100%. It's
In conducting the
here we go.
investigation, it was their obligation to point that out to me, and they did not.
Thank you very much. Now I'll read prepared remarks. So since it was known that the materials were distributed in May, I've done my own learning.
While we were gone, one of the trustees, Mr. Zakir, is still condemning the trustee.
In a gentle and thoughtful manner, in a concerted effort to provide both the Palestinian Jewish narratives. It is possible to call out anti-Semitism and support the rights of Palestinian peoples, because we must protect the rights of all. And I completely agree that any hate is unacceptable, whether it be anti-Jewish or anti-Palestinian, and no one should feel that their identity is erased. But I need to be very clear. I do not support the Integrity Commissioner's finding that my colleague, Trustee Alexandra Loka, committed a breach of our code of conduct, and I will go on to explain why I believe it does not breach our code of conduct. And in fact, I reject the very notion that she should be censored for calling out anti-Semitism when in fact some materials were found to be anti-Semitic. So it appears that to the community right now that a staff member was returned to his position without any consequences whatsoever for his perceived misstep. And this may not be entirely true, but it's what the staff member claims, and we have no other information on this. But now a trustee is subject to our code of conduct and investigated under direction of a third party in a very public process. Further, the Integrity Commissioner followed the advice of a third-party investigator, a lawyer who has very publicly tweeted views that jeopardize her perceived fairness. That noted, she also found some of the materials to be anti-Semitic, and that cannot be glossed over. There is now a presumption by the Jewish community that a trustee, enraged by possible anti-Semitism, is being silenced. In investigating the complaints against Trustee Loka with respect to the code, the Human Rights Office concluded that support of Palestinians does not constitute support of terrorist groups. Then how can it logically conclude that calling out anti-Semitism constitutes Islamophobia, that mentioning suicide bombing was Islamophobic? Where is the evidence that Alexandra is not in support of Palestinian human rights? The Integrity Commissioner's report alleges that Trustee Loka was only allowed to condemn the anti-Semitic portions of the materials if she did so while appropriately characterizing other materials as pro-Palestinian discourse. The Integrity Commissioner's finding of discrimination seems to hinge on completely on assuming that people cannot be relied to understand that some clearly means not all, and that Trustee Lalka should have explicitly stated that some materials in the packet were reasonable. But there was explicit acknowledgement that some of the materials were anti-Semitic, even by our own Human Rights Office. So every complaint of racism and discrimination and code breaches, if they do not also catalog or imagine positives associated with the wrongs they're condemning, not everything has two sides. The events of Charlottesville taught us that. To find Trustee Lalka breached the Code of Conduct conflicts with our duty of trustees under the Education Act. These duties require a considerable degree of transparency and timely communication with the general public. We are being asked to find a colleague breach the Code of Conduct for accurately describing material being distributed within TDSB as hateful. Calling for the board to instruct staff to investigate how such a lapse resulting in the violation of foundational board policy came about in order that procedures can be corrected, and communicating with the public that a controversy being widely publicized in the media and circulating among both the public and the staff is being addressed. No presentation of any position can be complete, particularly with the issue at hand. To say some of the materials are problematic implicitly means that others are not. What is acceptable? Will this board be able to define the exact words that trustees need to use while communicating? According to the Integrity Commissioner, her report only deals with breaking the code. The entanglement of the Middle East, these highly emotional issues, are actually obscuring the examination of the Code of Conduct, which was not breached and does not deserve censorship. That said, we all have an absolute moral imperative to call out hate. It's our collective responsibility to do so, but it does not breach our Code of Conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. We'll move to the next Trustee Roger Gilsing. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair. First, I'd like to thank Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig for bringing this report forward. And I think not just today, but in the last few years, she's had the very hard job of keeping all 22 trustees accountable. And I know it can't be an easy job, but I want to thank her for holding the space to have these tough conversations. I think in this report, there's a number of observations that are really important to reflect on, particularly one mentioned: avoidance of engaging in valuable and authentic equity, learning through silence or evasion of discussions effectively impedes movement towards progressive anti-racist education, and avoidance used by some educators are often because of their discomfort with learning about race, diversity, and oppression, which translates to maintaining dominance. And I think this is a very important statement because it really highlights the very deep systemic issue we have at the TDSB. No student should be denied the space to share their lived experiences or feel discriminated because of their identity, whether it's a Black student, a queer or trans student, or a Muslim student. I imagine school to be the safe space where we hold these difficult conversations and encourage students to be critical thinkers. We know that education was used as a colonial tool. And when we talk about decolonizing schools, what does that actually mean? It means recognizing that white supremacy is still the dominant narrative. It means recognizing at the largest school board in Canada, we have not yet achieved educational equity in every classroom. And it means recognizing our power and privilege. We all have privilege, whether it be settler privilege or able-bodied privilege. And sometimes privilege isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when we spend that privilege and amplify the work and voices of those without that same power. However, the most dangerous thing is when we don't recognize unchecked power and privilege in such an important institution like education, which is home to thousands and thousands of TDSB students. Oftentimes, racialized folks are categorized as minorities, but I'm sure when you put all of those minorities together, and I've said this so many times, when you put together minorities, it represents such a large number of students. And when we talk about discrimination and oppression and intersectionality, I think it's important to remember that unlike folks that are white or white passing, many are outed, their identities are outed because they're indicated by their skin tone or their religious attire. And I'm not here today to talk about oppression Olympics or whose trauma is greater. We must interrupt anti-Indigenous racism and anti-Black racism. We must interrupt homophobia and transphobia. And we must interrupt Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And I think this Integrity Commission report highlights many gaps. There is an urgency and a need to build capacity in our educators to have these difficult conversations. We must improve employment equity to reflect the student body. And we must ensure resources are brought to help us do this work respectfully and authentically. Educational equity is not only about celebrating Heritage Months, but it's about taking that deep dive and understanding intent, impact, and power, and understanding those who have it and those who have been historically denied it. And we must get to a point where we can ask ourselves, do all TDSB students feel safe, empowered, and included to share all aspects of their identity with us? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Rajapalli. The next trustee is Trustee McLean. You have the floor now.
Thank you, through the chair. The last few days, it's been through my email account, and there's been a lot of people reaching out indicating that you either stand with the Palestinian community or you stand with the Jewish community. And I
Stand with both.
I fundamentally don't accept the premise. I stand with the Palestinian community, and I stand with the Jewish community, and I stand against hatred of any kind. Tonight will be a discussion about a potential code violation. I'm quite disappointed that we're not dealing with these issues separately and that we only get to speak once. I think there's an issue before us, and whether there's a determination, whether there was a breach of the code of conduct, and if the board concludes there was, I think there's a second determination as to whether there should be a sanction imposed. I strongly believe we should have the opportunity to speak to both, and one happens after the other. The Integrity Commissioner's report talks about effect versus intent in terms of determining whether there was a violation or not. However, to determine whether censure is appropriate, I think intent is far more relevant. So to that end, I do, through the chair, have a question for the Integrity Commissioner, Ms. Craig. There was, 49 pages to determine the factual position, which the private investigator indicated, and that you indicated that you concurred that there was a breach of the 6.10. But there was 2 paragraphs that reference your recommendation to censure, and yet there was a little bit about the importance and how they are seen, and the priority ranking, if you like, but there was very little offered as to other choices at your discretion, why you believed censure was the appropriate thing to recommend. So my question is to the Integrity Commissioner: how did you come, not the factual account, but in determining what sanctions should be imposed? How did you get to the recommendation of a censure?
Through the chair to Trustee McLean. Thank you for that question. So whenever I make a determination that there has been a breach of the code protocol requires that I make a determination as to whether that was inadvertent or whether it was a contravention that occurred by virtue of good faith. And that's a longer discussion that I don't want to take your time right now. But based on the information, I found that it was not inadvertent. The trustee knew that she was going to make a tweet. But I also took into consideration that we were looking at a contravention of Rule 6.10, which is discrimination. Very quickly, at least 4 years ago, there was another trustee who was subject of an investigation, and that trustee had used homophobic slurs. And I felt that even though that trustee had said that was not her intent, that she stood with the community of the LGBTQS plus community, that the effect was one of discrimination. And when the bar is reached of discrimination, I believe that it is incumbent upon the Integrity Commissioner to use one of the penalties, unless it is inadvertent. And because the lesser penalty, in my view, is the censure, I have recommended the lesser censure. To be clear, Trustee McLean, your role as a trustee and the board's role is to determine, based on my findings, if my investigation has sufficient information, and if you do not believe that a censure is warranted. The board may vary that or reject that. But I believed that as an investigator, because I believe the investigation of discrimination was meted out, I determined that the lesser sanction of a censure was recommended.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the explanation. I accept the recommendation of the Integrity Commissioner, and I believe that a breach occurred. I am far less certain about whether censure is appropriate in this case. So I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. I will again state that I'm very disappointed that these are not separate issues and that we can't speak to, I think we should have been able to speak to them separately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee McLean. I'll just add a little bit of clarity here for everyone to understand. When we finish with our discussions, there will need to be a motion moved by a member of the board to consider what the determination is for this report. This is under the Education Act and through our own policy 708. We need to accept it, reject it, or amend it. And we must do that under the Education Act. The issue of a penalty or a censure is another issue. And if it doesn't, it can be part of the motion that's made. So it can be part of the discussion, or it could be rejected as well. It depends on the motion that is put on the floor by a member. So that's, I hope that helps. We'll move on.
Mr. Chair, may I add to clarify what Trustee McLean was asking? Trustees, if there's a motion on the floor, you would have the opportunity to speak to it again.
Yes, and of course, once the motion is on the floor, you speak to it again. Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to the next person on my list, which is Trustee Chernos Lynn. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. This is a very complex report that is nuanced and filled with so much information that it is hard to figure out where to move and how to move forward. I do not believe, I've done an awful lot of reflection on this, and I do not believe that there has been a breach of the code, and I'll explain why in my mind. We are tasked, and we know this as part of our education system, with naming, interrupting, and interrogating hate when we see it. And I do believe that is what my colleague Alexandra Lolka tried to do when she issued that tweet. The report itself brings out so many different things. The fact that some of the materials that were distributed contained anti-Semitism. The fact that anti-Semitism is incredibly nuanced and complex, and that there's a certain amount of confusion around that. And that the tweet was discriminatory based on a very nuanced understanding of anti-Muslim hate, to which I would argue trustees don't have the proper education to fully appreciate. Some of us do, some of us don't. And I think that's important. And when I look at this report, I am struck by the really serious concerns that it raises. And I have done a lot of thinking about what do we do with this report? And as our director said, we're not going to solve the problems in the Middle East, but we do have a responsibility as the Board of Education to create an environment in which everyone can learn and everyone can create a better understanding of each other, of all of our lived experiences, and so that we can become critical thinkers, and so that our students, first and foremost, can become critical thinkers. And so I truly believe that the best way forward is through education. It's our duty to ensure we're providing all of our students with safe and inclusive spaces, all of them, so that they too can learn and grow to become critical thinkers who we hope one day will work towards creating a better and more peaceful world for all. And to do that, we need to educate. We have to start with a lot of learning. For trustees, as leaders of the largest school board in Canada, we need to have a better standing of those we serve. And we need training to understand the nuance so that we can do that work better. All of those who work in our system need to have a better understanding. And they need to be supported with resources to deepen their learning so that we can ensure our education system is equipped to support all of our students. And so tonight I do plan to move a motion, not regarding the breach of code of conduct, because I don't believe that has truly occurred, but that finds a way forward so that we can ensure that we are providing our staff, our trustees, including myself, with better education to ensure that we can move forward in a productive way, where we provide an environment so that our students will have safe and inclusive spaces, so that they too can learn to grow and become critical thinkers, compassionate thinkers, ready to take on the world with creativity, compassion, understanding, and innovation. And so when it is an appropriate time, I would like to move a motion. Thank you.
Trustee Chernos-Lin. Trustee Mammoliti, you have the floor now. Vice Chair Mammoliti.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, first of all, I want to thank Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig for bringing the report and also providing your explanation and reasoning based on the questions that we have for you. For me personally, and I can only speak for me personally, these issues within the report at their root are far beyond my scope of comprehension. There's an element of understanding that I don't have. There's a lived experience that I don't have, and as hard as I am trying to understand that from the positions of my colleagues and those who have shared emails, reached out, I simply feel like I'm not equipped to be able to make a conclusion. What I do know unequivocally, though, is that we're working every single day to show the world the strength of diversity. Toronto is the most diverse city in the world. Canada is the most diverse country in the world, which means we have a responsibility to live with each other in an inclusive and positive way. Much like my colleague, Trustee Chernow-Slyn, and Director Russell Rollins mentioned, education is the key. Communication is the key. Empathy. Empathy is critical. We will never understand everything everyone goes through. But if we don't stop to take the time to try, we're not representing diversity. What we can't lose sight of in any of this dialogue is the health and safety of every single student and stakeholder that comes through our doors. We have an obligation to them. And when we look at elements like this, we have to make sure that we remember we're trustees working for public education. The idea of global conflict is very, very difficult to navigate. But the idea of creating a safe space for our students should be something, and I believe is something all of us believe in. This is a very, very difficult issue. But at the end of the day, the safe space for learning, the safe space for sharing, is what we as colleagues have to work towards. When we speak of the votes that are to come, I'm listening to my colleagues because I'm having a difficult time myself. And part of that is because I struggle with the comprehension. But at the end of the day, all I can ask of our colleagues, our team, is please, no matter what the result, no matter what the votes are, as Trustee Patel mentioned, we're reviewing a code of conduct complaint, but at the end of the day, our job is to put forward something sustainable that's going to create a safer space for all of our students. And the best way to do that is to work together. We have to share our experiences with each other in order for us to be able to provide that environment for everyone else. So I think from our perspective, wherever this ends, the work doesn't stop. We have to stay committed to creating the safe space and maintaining that as our priority. I have no doubt in my team. I'm confident in our school board. I'm confident in my colleagues, our staff, our director, our incredible director. I just ask our colleagues to do your best to try and separate what we can control with what we can't. And safe space, I believe we can control. Safe conversation, I believe we can control. Thank you very much for the time to speak.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Malidi. I'll hand the floor to Trustee Smith now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, I'm extremely torn, and I'm torn because as most of you know, I've had my reign in many parts of the world and have seen many things that have me today with air still moving through my body that I can breathe. And I've been given support on both sides of the equation, not to mention the many other countries in the world that I've been into. And so it's a very, very hard place for me to speak from. but I have to speak. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank the Integrity Commissioner, Ms. Susan Craig. I've always listened to her in her remarks on her written submission to this board. Always methodical, careful in planning, and the structure which she sees it through the lens. And I heard tonight that not having parts of the information, she sought even further advice, and I'm encouraged by that. I also listened to my colleague, Trustee Petal, when he stated that it's a bad precedent. When we look at the expulsions and suspensions of our students for saying certain things and consequence to that. I don't want to be above the law. I don't want to be above any other trustee or any student administrators of this board. When things go wrong, we must deal with them accordingly. I don't have the capacity and knowledge of the Integrity Commissioner, Ms. Susan Craig, and so I listened to her very carefully in what she's saying. There's a question for Ms. Craig. When we talk about censoring, what is the duration of those censoring, Ms. Craig?
Through Chair Brown to Trustee Smith, a censure is a statement. In the municipal council regime, it is called a reprimand. And I know that many people have different ideas of what a censure is, but for the purposes of the Education Act, I'm not looking at how it was applied before. I'm looking at my understanding of a censure. It is the lesser of all penalties, and it is a statement by the board that a breach has occurred and it shouldn't have occurred. It is not a suspension. It is not a penalty of administrative monetary value. It is a statement by the board saying that a contravention occurred.
Very well said.
There is no.
Sorry,
We lost Ms. Craig.
Dan, you're muted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had finished, Trustee Smith.
You're finished?
Yes. There is no duration because it is a statement.
Okay. I thank you very much for clarifying that in my mind. I want to make certain it's clear. And we are held by a very high standard as elected officials of the Toronto District School Board, the largest board in Canada. And I know a number of people are listening to these comments here this afternoon or this evening. And I think as a public representative, we have to be mindful. I don't care who you are. And I'm not going to get into the various groupings because I like to keep myself very natural that way. However, we are a public representative, and as a result of that, we have to know how to carry ourselves to make certain that the wrong message is not being presented to our students. I remember going to a school, and there's a principal who recently had suspended a student for wearing a T-shirt that had certain designs on it, only to find himself a few weeks later doing something totally unacceptable. I'm not going to get into it this evening, but we have to be careful as public figures that are representing our schools to ensure that we are doing always the right thing. And when you're not sure, ask your colleagues, ask your friends to make certain that you are going down the right path. I couldn't agree this evening. Early on, Madam Director did make mention about the both sides of this coin or this equation and the things that she's working to put in place. I commend her for that because I think it's a working process, and I can tell you in the 80s I've been busy in that region, and I can tell you that there's work endless. It's not going to end on one side or the other, but we have to be mindful that we don't get too much of this coming into our schools, because I still strongly believe that the communication piece for us is education, education, and more education. So we want to make certain that we don't go too far off from that basis. The next question I'd like to talk about, I heard my colleague, Ms. Lucas, said tonight that if she sees it, she will help or work towards eradicating it from it being announced out there. And I couldn't commend her more for saying that. But we still have to be careful, because if we say things the wrong way, it creates problems on the other side. And I'm saying I'm looking for a scale of balance where both sides of that equation, through some form of better communication, can bring these forces together, or else we are playing down a path that would have no end to it. And I've seen this over the many, many, many years, and hope that we can find a resting place for us to get along as a nation, working with common goals for education and better addressing concerns for student well-being. Thank you very much. I noticed my time is up.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Smith. We will now move to Trustee Artis.
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to be as eloquent as some of my colleagues, just because I'm not. I, as an individual, do not have the expertise in code of conduct legislation or cultural political perspectives to analyze what's in this report. And I think this is why, as a board, we employ an integrity commissioner and give her office the power of engaging independent experts to run investigations. On that level, our integrity commissioner has made a finding of a breach of a code of conduct, and I don't have the expertise to counter this. But I do fail to see, in the broader context, how a censure is a proactive move forward. It's a reprimand. It's not a plan of attack. It's not a how do we grow from this. This report as a whole is not straightforward. It encompasses highly sensitive and polarizing political and cultural divisions, lived experiences, and highlights the impact of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. More importantly, several aspects of the investigation highlight system gaps in our approaches to sensitive and divisive material, and gaps in our policies, and especially in our communication. Addressing these gaps goes beyond any single trustee. We need to address the policy gaps, but more importantly, we need education and training as a board to better understand the issues that are highlighted here and how to communicate effectively and sensitively so that we're inclusive of all the communities that we represent, and not entrenching further harm. I would like to see suggestions on how we move forward with this in a proactive way, and how we grow as an entire board from this experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Trustee Story, hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too thank the Integrity Commissioner for her very thorough work. I have a deep and profound respect for her time at our board and for the support that she has given us and her detailed analysis tonight. And I spent most of the day today rereading and contemplating the contents and poring over the content of the text from Trustee Loka and thinking really carefully about how I was going to consider these issues tonight. And if you hear my voice shaking, it's because this is a challenging issue for all of us. And it reminds me a lot, actually, of the time when I stood up in the boardroom and spoke about my support for getting rid of school resource officers, because at that time, too, we had to make some tough decisions in the face of a lot of public heat and backlash. And that's part of the job. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be. But I stood up there, even though I got hate mail around that issue, and even though I had principals and staff yell at me at some points in some schools for compromising their safety, I stood up and I made my support known for that issue because it is an essential part of our job to make sure that our students, excuse me, I apologize, that our students, all of our students, feel safe and included and protected as much as we are capable of doing that in the spaces that within which we educate them. Excuse me. But I don't see in the text of the tweet and the breach that is being suggested here. And I also do think it's incredibly important for us to note that the report says that the contents of the mailings did point to that some of the contents in those mailings were perceived by the Integrity Commissioner and the independent reviewer to be anti-Semitic. I think it's really important in our role as trustees that we stand up and speak in support of our communities, especially communities that have experienced oppression, and make sure that they know that as their elected representatives, that we have their backs. And I also am concerned that I've heard some, what I perceive at least to be some anti-Semitic tropes even being reflected in the conversation that we've had here this evening. I can't pick and choose, and I think that the director's words at the start of the evening tonight were a valiant attempt at saying this. We can't pick and choose which oppressions we stand up against. And so tonight I will not be voting in favor of any motion to censure, and I will be very much in support of Trustee Chernos-Lynn's motion when she introduces it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Story. Trustee Lee, I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. This report was tough to read, I'm going to be honest. I read it a couple of times, and it's even tougher for me to comprehend and grasp the entire situation, not only with it, surrounding how Trustee Loca's actions has violated a policy, but also the historical and political and cultural context behind the entire incident. Now, if I were to summarize it, in my very simplistic way of understanding this, and I know it's fairly simplistic, my summary would be that Trustee Loca did nothing wrong in identifying what she believed to be racism. She did nothing wrong in standing up for a community that she represents. But we are, through the report, the Integrity Commissioner was concerned about how that communication was put forth. In other words, the diction that was used was, may have violated a policy, or the Integrity Commissioner believed that it violated policy. If that's the case, words matter, how we communicate matter, how we set an example on how we position ourselves in public matter. But so be it. However, I do want to highlight that whatever actions that we may choose or choose not to take against our colleague tonight, we need to take a reflection upon ourselves on what we have done to land us at this point, or what we have done to prevent a staff member and a trustee colleague to come to a point where we have to discuss this situation in this forum tonight. As Trustee or Vice Chair Mamoudy, has mentioned, we live in the most diverse city of the most diverse country in the world. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of historical context, political realities, cultural norms converging exactly where we sit today. And we as a school board have a duty and an obligation to make sure that we are not unclear on how we deal with this entire complex set of relationships. We need to let our staff know, we need to let ourselves know, we need to let our students know. If we are ambiguous towards this matter, we will land ourselves here again. And we will be having this conversation again. I do not ever want to have this conversation against anyone or about anyone. So whatever actions it will take, I believe, we owe a duty to our students and our community to either censure or, educate ourselves, all of us as a collective. Because what we are talking about today is a symptom of a systemic issue of not addressing reality in the most clear and unambiguous way. And we have to do better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Next, Trustee Tonks, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, very tough issue tonight, obviously. I didn't envy the Integrity Commissioner having to draft this and review this issue. It's unfortunate that it's here. I want to start, with my colleague Trustee Patel's comments and respectfully his comments about the institution of what the TDSP stands for. And I got to be honest with you, I take a little bit of a different take on it. Yes, we represent the board, but I also do believe that we have a duty to call out various inequities, issues that we disagree with, and whether it's in this case with what Trustee Loka has done or others, and you've mentioned, and I know Trustee Patel has been really on St. Margaret's and trying to get a new school built, and I support him in that respect, and he should be able to call out that publicly in the strongest way possible. We've seen so many issues at the board. Maybe I've been here too long. I thank Trustee Story for recognizing the difficulty of the SRO issue. I remember that being a very difficult one. We've had the Armenian genocide issue here, where we were confronted with trying to determine whether we should be labeling what happened in that historical context as a genocide. We've been tasked with the creation of Afrocentric schools. You name it. The tough issues, the tough social issues of the day come to this board. And the one thing I want to say is that every time it's come to this table, I've always seen it debated with respect. And I think that's something for all the people that are watching here tonight can take away, that this is a board that takes the issues very, very seriously. With respect to the issue at hand, and, I read the words of Trustee Loka, I've read the report, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with the investigator that the Integrity Commissioner seconded for this investigation. I'm not prepared to ascribe the intent, the impact, the words that was spoken by Trustee Loka in the context of what she said, based on her lived experience, based on the historical, experiences that she's had. I don't take sides in this issue. I truly don't. I come to the table as someone who's from a very, very mixed cultural background. And, I come to the table saying, we are the world. Why can't we all get along? That's truly what I believe in. But I'm obviously a lot more cognizant that there's a lot more difficulty to that. And, we always have hope for the future and hope for our children. And that's the way we want to, proceed forward. And we do have a duty as an education system to do that. But I just got to go on my gut tonight. I do not believe that this amounts to a code breach. And I'll tell you, there's another aspect to this. And I think that Trustee Lee sort of touched on it. We as trustees, politicians, if you want to call us, have a little bit different role. And I think that the Integrity Commissioner highlighted that at the beginning of her speech and her comments to us. And my worry is, whether it's this issue or another issue, there's the potential of chill that sets in. That if we're not able to comment, and I get it, in a respectful and dignified way, on the tough issues of the day, my concern that what we have here today, what's the next issue of the day that's coming to us? How do we comment? Reserved in our approach. Maybe we're not calling out things that should be called out directly. I'm really cognizant of that. And I think that that's the fundamental difficulty that I have with an issue like this, given the complexity that underlies it, is on the next issue of the day, are we going to be afraid to really call out those underlying tensions that might exist? So, I think that my take is that this one, it's just not there for me. I am prepared to respectfully reject the Integrity Commissioner's report tonight, or her recommendation tonight. I think it may have been the first time, respectfully, but those are my comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Pong. Just looking at the list to see if there are any other people on it. I'm not seeing any other speakers. Are there any other speakers? Okay. So now we're at a point where the discussion on the report is finished, and I'm just going to outline for you the next step so that we all understand what we're doing. First of all, I would like to thank the Integrity Commissioner for her report tonight. And just to highlight our procedure here, in accordance with the Education Act, and I'm just going to read the section 218.3 and the TDS procedure 708, the board must now make a determination regarding the content of the report. The Integrity Commissioner has recommended on page 49 of the agenda package a censure in respect of issue number one, and the respondent's breach of rule 6.10 or 610 from our code. I will now ask a member of the board to move a motion to accept, reject, or amend the recommendation presented to us in the Integrity Commissioner's report. This is something that under the Education Act we must do. So is there a motion on the floor to accept? And that would mean that the recommendation for board censure and the breach of Rule 610, to reject, which means that you would recommend not to censure and not to recognize the breach of Rule 610, or an amendment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, could I ask a point of clarification?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. It's Trustee Pilkey. Could we do nothing?
No, we have to do something. And
we have to do something.
Ms. Joseph Dowers will highlight that the board's obligation under the Education Act is to make a determination. So if we decide not to accept either of it, that would be the amendment. Reject it.
Can I make a point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes, what is the point of order?
Today we were provided through your office the Education Act as it applied to tonight's proceedings. Under resolutions, the Education Act 218.3 indicated that resolutions are required, plural. One, to make a determination under subsection 2 that a member has breached the board's code of conduct. 2, to impose a sanction under subsection 3. 3, to confirm or revoke a determination under the clause. And 4, to confirm, vary, or revoke a sanction under subsection 8. I think these are multiple issues that the Integrity Commissioner makes a finding, a determination, and she imposes a sanction. She does two things in her report. I think the Education Act requires us to deal with them separately. And quite frankly, my answers to them are different. So I would argue and put forth to the chair and to Ms. Joseph Dowers that we should be doing this differently.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Just one moment, Trustee Laskin, and I'll recognize that in a second. So I'm going to ask Ms. Joseph Dowers to highlight it, but if I'm mistaken, it needs to be corrected. But the board's responsibility under determination and sanction, from what I have in front of me from the Education Act, section 218.3, is if the board determines there has been a breach, the board may impose one or more of the following sanctions. And those were highlighted by the Integrity Commissioner. The word may means that we don't have to. Under the Education Act, section 218.3, sorry, one second. In the inquiry process, it states the board shall make inquiries in this matter and make a determination about whether the board has breached the code of conduct. That one says shall, so we have to do that one. In terms of the sanction, we may do it if we choose. And if this is not right, Ms. Joseph Dowers will be able to.
Mr. Chair, as you have stated, that's correct.
So, Ms. Joseph Dowers, with respect to what Trustee McLean has asked, is there any other comment that you'd like to make, or should we go to Trustee Laskin's motion?
If Trustee Laskin could state what her motion is.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I vote to reject the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation, and I ask for a recorded vote.
Would second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that has been moved by Trustee Laskin and seconded by Trustee Pilkey to reject both
Here we go. Big vote.
the code breach and the sanction as the recommendation.
If you give us a minute, Mr. Chair, we'll put that up on the screen.
Okay. And then from this point, the floor will be open for further discussion on this.
Please, no more discussion.
And please keep in mind that motions on the floor can be amended as well.
Oh my God.
Ms. Joseph Dowers, while you're preparing that, I'm mindful of the time. And we have been in this meeting since 7 p.m. and it's now 9:30. Can I recommend that we take a 5 or 10 minute, is everyone okay with a 5-minute break, or would you prefer a 10-minute break? I think we need to take a break before we continue. 10-minute break is good?
Yeah.
I think we need to take a break. Everyone relax.
Why would we take a break right before a vote? Hey, one.
10 minutes, which would make it, what time is it now? Sorry.
9:37.
So about 9, let's come back about 9:45.
You know,
Oh my Lord.
Gary, is there any way that I mean, I know it's going on for a long time, but that short video that was from Twitter that Ron sent of that Holocaust survivor,
Let me see if I have it.
in the context of Jews getting used to being second class, third class, and worse.
Yeah, let me find it. SCH and
Hey, Meir, if you're a gambling man at this point, where's the vote going? After hearing everybody,
I think they're
speak
going to
after-
reject the. I think
Yeah,
they're
me
going
too.
to reject.
they're going to
Yeah.
reject it because they
But
wanted to make sure that their Muslim friends aren't offended, so they had to clarify it before they
Yeah.
reject.
I don't think it's going to be unanimous, which is
No.
troubling.
Here's another thing I'd like to bring up, and hopefully somebody who's listening to us and has a child at the TDSB in one of the schools or is an employee of the schools.
Mhm.
If you paid attention, the chair of the board began the meeting wearing a keffiyeh quite openly, to a meeting where they were about to censure a Jewish trustee.
To intimidate her, too.
To intimidate her, to intimidate the board, and to intimidate those of us who were watching it from home.
Right.
Somebody must have alerted him that his picture was circulating all over Twitter and social media, because he came back and took off that kafia and went on to wear, a blazer or something, and glasses, made himself all of a sudden to seem to be a different person.
Totally different.
I would suggest that a formal complaint has to be made against him. His kafia caused me to feel unsafe during the meeting. Secondly, that kafia also was prejudicial to try and prejudice people's opinions, including board members' opinions, on how the vote should go. And I think somebody needs to bring that up. I'm not from Toronto, so I don't have the capability. He should be investigated by the same lady who investigated Trustee Luke, and he should be also censored and brought up, to the meeting. And let's have a discussion about why wearing a kafia seemed appropriate at the beginning of a meeting where they were about to censor a Jewish trustee.
Yeah, exactly.
Do
we have that screenshot, Gary, that we could show right now of him?
The video or the screenshot? I'm queuing up the video.
Yeah, just first the screenshot of what Ron is talking about, the chair of this meeting, wearing that kafia.
Yeah, I just got a text message from somebody who stated to me the following.
Which screenshot are we talking about?
The chair of the board wearing a kafia. So I just got a text for somebody who's also monitoring.
Did you send me the?
I'll send you in a second, but this is important.
Send me the screenshot.
This is an important text I got from somebody who's monitoring as well, saying to me, I believe they called a break to figure out what to do to counter the motion to reject the censorship. So it'd be interesting to see when they come back how this 10-minute break evolves into something very different. They thought this was a slam dunk. They were going to walk in here, censor her, and teach the Jews a lesson.
Yeah.
And I think what they're learning is that, when Jews need to be united, when we confront anti-Semitism, blatant anti-Semitism, and when one of our people is being called out for standing up for a community, for standing up for Judaism, for standing up against anti-Semitism, we circle around them. We bring protection and a level of protection to that person, and we support them.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, the speech that she made today was outstanding.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Gary, I'll send you that picture.
Okay, Meir, I do have that video if you want it at some point.
Yeah. Okay, you could put the video on right now, and then you could show the screenshot right after.
Okay.
The screenshots the chair of the meeting.
It'll give me time to make a mean amount of screenshot. So
one day in those early 1930s, you can read an inscription on the benches. Jews must not sit on these benches. You could say, it's unpleasant, it's not fair, it's not right. But after all, there are so many benches around. You can sit somewhere else. Of course you can. There was a swimming pool, and over its door, an inscription read, Jews are forbidden to enter. You could say, well, pleasant this is not, but there are so many places in Berlin where you can take a bath or swim, so many lakes, canals, it's nearly like Venice. At the same time, you can read somewhere else, Jews must not belong to German singing associations. So what? All right, they want to sing, they want to make music. Let them just meet somewhere else, they will do their singing. All right. What comes up later is an order, really, more of an order than of an inscription. Non-Aryan children must not play with Aryan children, with the German children. All right, they'll play on their own. And then you read, we always sell bread and food to Jews after 5 p.m. Right? Less choice. This makes your life harder. But after all, after 5 p.m. you can still do your shopping. And that's how it is done, step by step, slowly.
No, it's not bad.
And they become acquainted with that thought,
did you send it? How did you
familiar
send
with the
it?
idea that they are different people, that they are alien people, that they are
No, that's good.
people
This
that
Ron sent it
carry
also.
germs, that cause pandemics. And this now is a horror. What came later was something that developed immediately. Jews could not get jobs, they could not emigrate. And then, quickly, Jews would be sent to ghettos, to Kaunas, to Riga, to my ghetto. Auschwitz did not fall suddenly from the skies. It was pattering, all those tiny steps. It was approaching until what happened here behind me did happen.
About the same. It's about the same.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, Meir, what he's talking about that happened in the late 1920s, early 1930s is not
Right.
much different than what we're witnessing even tonight as we're watching
Right.
this commotion at the TDSB. It's
Absolutely.
slowly, it's little thing. Let's censor her, let's do this.
Right.
It's little things. No kosher
And they're
food.
talking in polite terms.
Gentleman wearing
We reached it.
What's the
Yeah.
gentleman's name? I'll put him on the screen.
Who, the chair of the
He's wearing
the chair of the board?
Change
His name is Alexander Brown.
Okay.
Alexander Brown.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
But this gentleman is speaking the truth, and this is happening, slowly again, in 2021, 2022, in North America and Europe. It's little things, it's small things. And you and I talked about it probably 2-3 years ago with the sudden explosion onto the scene of Canadian Defenders for Human Rights. And when I said to you, they're a test balloon. Somebody's sending them out to see how far they can push, the police, our community, politicians, leadership, right? Can we do a walk against Israel within the Jewish community? Is that going to be permissible? Okay, can we cross that line? Can we cross the next line? How far can we carry our Jew hate and anti-Semitism until the community stands up and says, this is the red line? And I have to tell you, until this point, the community, and when I talk about the community, I'm talking about the Canadian community, has not put down that red line. You and I spoke today about the fact that there's now a network from within the federal government employees, Jewish federal government employees, who put together a network, a group, because they're dealing with such vehement anti-Semitism within the federal government, within their own departments, that is not being treated and respected, by their superiors. And they had to put together a group that then had to go to the Privy Council and had to call out, the Prime Minister and Cutler and say, what are we doing to fight this anti-Semitism? The gentleman who started this particular network says that he's been in the service for 30 years, including being an ambassador representing Canada. And he says in his 30 years working in the federal government, he's never seen something like this. And he can never recall another time where Jewish employees of the federal government had to come together and create a network to fight and raise the concerns about anti-Semitism from within our own government. So if the call is coming out from within our own government, if it's already institutionalized within our own government, the war is much more difficult than we first thought. And
Why would the chair of this meeting, the TDSB, who was wearing the keffiyeh, why would he call a recess when they're ready to vote? That's
because I don't think the vote was or the day was going the way that they anticipated. He came in with a keffiyeh almost like a winner ahead of time. In Hebrew there's a saying that says Al yachgog choger kemfateach, which means he who goes to battle should not celebrate as he who returns from battle. And he was celebrating when he was just going out to battle, putting on his keffiyeh and trying to declare already a win. And this is coming back, slap in their face. And what do we do now? Because the integrity commissioner is being called out. They're pretty much being told this is out of line. This what we're doing today here is completely out of line. There is no censoring to be done. And this is smacking in the face of the people who are pushing this hard from within the board, from the Integrity Commission, and for the private investigator. I'm dumbfounded that nobody from the board called him out for wearing a keffiyeh at the beginning. I'm dumbfounded nobody from the board called out the independent investigator for her anti-Israel tweets, her likes of anti-Israel tweets, her support, for tweets that support, terrorism.
Take a look at what I just sent you.
I'm dumbfounded. Yeah.
Alexander Brown, trustee.
Yeah.
Sure.
There he is from today. 2 different shots of the same trustee. One at the top is from the beginning of the show where he was no problem wearing his keffiyeh, no glasses, no nothing, hair different. And here he comes back after somebody must have told him, hey, listen, what are you doing wearing the keffiyeh? And look at how he came back to present himself as somebody different later on. But what he doesn't recognize is that screen captures are a wonderful thing.
Right.
Oh, we're coming back. We're back.
Oh, we're back.
Gary, we're back.
We now have on the screen, I think for everyone to view, a motion that was moved by Trustee Laskin and seconded by, who seconded it?
Trustee Pilkey.
Trustee Pilkey, thank you. And I'll read it out, that the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation as presented in the report be rejected. And the recommendation is below. I tender this complaint investigation report to the Board of Trustees for their consideration and make the recommendation of censure in respect of issue number 1 and the respondent's breach of Rule 6.10. So now I will open the floor for discussion. Discussion on this, and I have Trustee Laskin first. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to reiterate the points why I think it's a very slippery slope for us to agree that Trustee Lolka's statement would be in violation of our code. First of all, if we find she breached the code, then I actually believe it conflicts with our duty of trustees under the Education Act. In the purpose section of the Act, it notes that all of our duties require considerable degree of transparency and timely communication with the general public, especially on issues that could cause a reduction in public confidence. I actually believe right now we have a crisis of confidence in the public in this board. We are being asked to find a colleague breach the code of conduct for accurately describing material being distributed within TDSB as hateful. In this case, anti-Semitic, but it could be any type of hate. For calling for the board to instruct staff to investigate how such a lapse resulting in the violation of a foundational board policy came about in order that the procedures can be corrected, and communicating with the public that a controversy being widely publicized in the media and circulating among the public and staff is being addressed. Please remember again, no presentation of any position can be complete, and that everyone, especially those entrusted with setting complex public policies, at times will communicate in ways that can be misunderstood, particularly when the issue at hand is contentious. But we have freedom of speech. Stating that some of the distributed materials are problematic implicitly means that others are not problematic. Finding somebody breached the code for not making this inherent distinction explicit, which is what I take the Commissioner's reasoning to be, will open every conscientious trustee to code violations probably several times a year. What is acceptable or not acceptable in communication? Trustee Lolka's intent was not malicious, nor were her tweets persistent or harassing. She heard that anti-Semitic information was circulated, and she demanded an investigation. That is one of her roles as a trustee. She did not demand that someone be fired, or reported to the College of Teachers, or castigated by the board. Will this board or any board be able to define the exact words that a trustee can use while communicating? How can we say somebody breached the code for what she did not say? I simply can't comprehend that. I simply cannot. Our students and staff deserve to be in a public school system where all human rights are protected. But it's a moral imperative to call out hate in all forms. It's our collective responsibility to do so. And that's exactly what our colleague did. Under the Education Act, I cannot see it as a breach. And I asked us all to think about the consequences, the far-reaching consequences, if we find words she did not say to be in violation of our code of conduct. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Donaldson.
Thanks, through Chair. I want to thank my colleagues for this motion. Like many of my colleagues have previously expressed, I find the support to be lacking and will therefore be voting to reject it. I'm very committed to continuing to work on a path forward for the sake of all our students. And quickly, I just want to say, I firmly believe that the way that we change the world is in the classroom, not on Twitter. And that's why I'm so heartened tonight to hear the words of our director and the commitment of all of our staff to all of our students. That's the level of care our students deserve and need. And I also look forward to hearing more of the motion Trustee Charles has spoken to previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Donaldson. Trustee Lolka.
Thank you. I would also urge trustees to reject this report. It is deeply flawed contradictory, and confusing. It confirms that everything that I said is true, but still wants to censure me for speaking the truth without an analysis of my rights to free speech under the Charter. And I worry that this sets a precedent that straitjackets the role of a trustee. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Lalka. Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Integrity Commissioner on this report. It's encouraging to hear from fellow trustees that some of them do believe that there was a violation of code, and which is good to hear. And as Trustee Chernoslin and then McLean, my colleague, said that these are two separate issues.
He's the one who's trying to push.
He's
the one trying to push the censure.
That's a topic of another time. I firmly believe that under Section 218.1 of Education Act, the role of a trustee, which includes bringing concern of parents, students, and supporters of the board to the attention of the board, not take things in our own hand. I believe that the breach was done, and I will be voting against this motion, Mr. Chair. And I'll be voting against this motion, this amendment. It's not because it's a different issue. It's about protecting this office of Integrity Commissioner. It's protecting our institution. And my vote is to protect this institution. It's not about Trustee Lulka. It's not about the issue of Palestine.
He'll protect an area that is anti-Semitic, ridiculous.
There's only one subject in our TDSB system, which is the history. We teach math, science, English with the same language. There's no issues there. There's a larger issues at the history. And this is where we have to focus ourselves, right? And we have to be very careful when we mix two issues on the same table. And I have seen at this board, I mean, we do healthy debates on it, right? But again, when we do debates, what are we debating? That's a key question in this. And this whole report is, for me, it's about code of conduct. I'll be voting against the amended motion just to protect my institution, which I believe in, and I have trust and faith in it. There was a reason why this office was created in 2015. We have to ask ourselves a question, why this office was created in 2015 and not prior to that? Why was that? There has to be something in it. And this is what it is right now, code of conduct. It clearly says that social media are governed by the rules of the code. So I firmly believe in Integrity Commissioner and her findings, and I'm voting against this motion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Patel. Trustee Chernoslin, you're next.
I just wanted to clarify that I'm in favor of this motion. I'm not in favor of. I'm in favor of this motion that's before us right now.
Okay, thank you. Trustee McLean, you indicated you have an amendment.
Oh my God, amendment.
Yes, thank you through the chair.
For the love of
I didn't
God.
find my earlier arguments compelling.
This guy is ridiculous.
So there's generally more than one way to skin a cat. So I would like to offer an amendment. I would like to withdraw the reference to censure in the motion, and I would like the motion to simply make the recommendation for their consideration, and to make the recommendation of the respondent's breach of Rule 6.10. So I don't want to ask one question to decide two issues. We're asking two questions here, and I think we should be asking one. So I would like the censure portion of it withdrawn, and for us to vote solely on whether we believe the respondent breached the code of conduct.
Okay, so let me just, Ms. Joseph Dowers, did you get that? We also need a seconder for this.
Mammoliti will second.
Okay, so by Trustee McLean and seconded by Trustee Mammoliti, but we just have to get the verdict on it.
So you're asking to delete part, sorry, it was removed.
So in essence, they want to find that she breached without censoring her.
Section be removed, correct?
I think so. It's easier to tell when they're both on the screen, but
Yeah.
but yeah,
One second.
that's conceptually what I'm after is to remove the portion that refers to censure.
So in essence, to reject the censure, but to support the code breach issue.
I would like us to decide whether Trustee Lolka breached the code.
Right.
And then if, in fact, collectively we conclude that she did, we can address what the appropriate sanction will be. But I think there are two separate questions. My answers to them are different. And I'm being asked to vote one way on two issues. So I'm finding, as it was offered by Trustee Laskin, I don't know how to vote on this because the and is killing me over here. So I think we should do them separately.
Okay, thank you. We got it. So that's
Give us a minute, Mr. Chair. We will put back the original motion that's on the floor and show it as strike through what Trustee McLean is recommending so that trustees will be able to follow.
Yes, please do that. We'll give you a minute.
Thank you.
And then once that is done, we'll start another speakers list on, and then we have one person on the list now.
This is the censure that never ends. It goes on and on, my friend.
It's up on the screen. Thank you.
So I'm just going to read this out so we're all aware of what it says. That the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation is presented in the report that Trustee Lolka breached Rule 610 of the Code of Conduct be rejected. Okay. Is this what you're looking for, Trustee McLean?
Yeah, this works. Thank you.
All right, so that is the amendment. And we're discussing only the amendment now. So Trustee Laskin, you can go first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't know how this is in order. If in fact there was a breach of a code, the Integrity Commissioner recommends the sanction. If there was no breach in a code, then it's moot, completely moot. So the issue, at least maybe I am misunderstanding, and I would seek clarification from the Integrity Commissioner. But my understanding of the Education Act is if the Integrity Commissioner moves that there was a breach, then she recommends what to do about the breach. And if in fact, that's why it says we can accept, reject, or amend. So if a colleague didn't want to censor, the colleague could say, let's remove her from attending private session for 6 months, or whatever else is one is able to do within the confines of the Education Act. But if we reject, the censor piece is completely moot because it's one of the same. And if I could ask the Integrity Commissioner for clarification, because I do not believe the Integrity Commissioner can say there's a breach and then not ask for a recommendation of how to deal with that breach. That I admit I could absolutely be wrong. So I ask you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, please.
Yes, so Ms. Craig, Integrity Commissioner Craig, would you like to respond?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Laskin. Trustee Laskin, we have, with the Education Act, a very interesting process. So by way of explanation, with the Municipal Act, what the Municipal Act has done is taken the power to receive complaints and investigate from the council and given it to a created body, the Integrity Commissioner. The Education Act has not done that. The Education Act, as it is currently written, sets out, as you well know, that the board receives complaints and the board investigates and the board makes decisions. What the board, the TDSB, the first in Canada, has decided to do is to create the office of the Integrity Commissioner. So while you have made a policy that has created my office and given me the opportunity to receive complaints and make recommendations to you under the code protocol, the Education Act does not recognize that. So I think this is a legal question. I think it is unclear. I'm not in the position to provide legal advice. So I believe that by creating a policy where you have given me the authority to make findings, I have made findings. The protocol says you may accept those findings, which is that there has been a breach. And then the Education Act, which is the second part, I believe, seeing that we have this bifurcated process, will then say, what penalties will you mete out? And in this case, you may mete out none. So, Trustee Laskin, I'm not in a position right now to confirm or not your understanding, because we have a hybrid model with the Education Act. We have the Code Protocol and we have the Education Act. In my view, the Education Act supersedes a policy. So, if I must give an answer, I would say that you're correct. But I'm not going to give a legal opinion on the Education Act and the issuance of penalties.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's fine. The substance to reject is still there, so I'm good with the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Laskin. I do not see any other comments.
Can I get clarification?
Yes, go ahead.
On the wording, please.
Yes, go ahead.
So are we, what does exactly this mean? We reject it. Okay, can I get clarification, Dennis, on this?
So, yeah, so what I'm saying is that if you vote for this in favor, then we would have determined if the board decides as a group.
This guy really wants the censure to go through, eh?
Whatever the vote count is, then there would not be a breach. It would not be considered a breach of Rule 610. If we do not support this, then we would have recognized that there was a breach of Rule 610.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other speakers.
Let's vote.
Who put their name on the list. So in this case,
It's like the UN vote.
We would open the vote on this, and I know that there was a request for a recorded vote.
Ward 16, accept. Ward 20, reject.
Sorry, we're voting on the amendment. You don't want a recorded vote for that. That was from the main motion, right?
Correct. The recorded vote on the amendment is not necessary. Thank you.
So this is the vote on the amendment only. Oh, sorry, Ms. Joseph Dowers, are we using the e-scribe system?
Yes. Point of clarification. If we're only voting on the amendment, so all we're deciding is whether if we vote to approve this, we are agreeing to take a censure in respect of issue 1 out of the motion, and if we vote against it, we leave it back in. Is that correct?
That's right.
Thank you.
And then we would have to go back to voting on the main motion again. That's correct.
Thank you very much.
I do believe the e-scribe is open now.
Mr. Chair, I don't have e-scribe open. I support the amendment.
You support the amendment. Okay, thank you.
Chair, I'm against the amendment.
Thanks. I'm against this.
I'm in favor of the amendment. It's Trustee Cherneslin.
I'm in favor of the amendment. It's Trustee Pilkey. I can't seem to get it.
Trustee Nunziata in favor of the amendment.
Watch it.
Trustee Story in favor of the amendment?
So it seems the amendment will pass.
Can I ask a question quickly, please? We're in the vote now.
Live vote going on. TDS.
Sorry.
No problem.
So we're synced in.
Mr. Chair, my will stop popping up, but I'm in favor.
Okay.
Through the chair, trustees Candavel, Rajagopal, Mr. Skandaraja, and Loka.
Can I just point of clarification that I'm not allowed to vote on this?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
That is correct. Thank you. So there was Trustee Candavel, Trustee Shishkandaraja, and who else?
Trustees Candavel, Rajagopal, and Mr. Skandaraja.
Okay, we're not hearing from them. So we'll have to mark them as absent. So that amendment carries.
So the amendment carries about removing the censure from the first part.
What's the
If you
count?
will give us a minute, Mr. Chair, to put the proper wording on the
13 in favor, 4 against, 5 absentees. So 13 in favor, 4 against, 5 absentees.
One sec, guys.
So is this it? Looks like the same.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So can I just confirm this? That the Integrity Commission Trustee Local breach be rejected. So the main motion is, as it's written, I tender this complaint investigation report to the Board of Trustees for their consideration and make the recommendation of a censure in respect of issue number 1 in the respondent's breach of Rule 6.10. Okay, so that is the main motion. And
sorry, through the chair, I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it myself.
I made an amendment. So we passed, and the amendment's not reflected. To the best of my.
That's what I was thinking as well, Mr. Joseph.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The first 2 lines, that is the amended motion. What is written below that?
Oh, okay, right. It's the top part. It's the top.
Exactly.
But the Integrity Commissioners, I read the wrong part, sorry. But the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation is presented in the report that Trustee Local breached Rule 6.10 of the Code of Conduct be rejected. So that is now the main motion. Is that I still? All right. So that's what's on the floor. Trustee Doyle.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, you had a question. Do we still have the quorum?
We're going to vote?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we would have to do a quorum check. Do you want to just go through the attendance so we can confirm?
Sure. Actually,
this is a recorded vote.
So, Trustee Arts? Trustee Brown? Yes. Trustee Chinneslim?
I'm here.
Trustee Donaldson?
Here.
Trustee Doyle?
I'm here.
Trustee Gill? Trustee Gill? Trustee Candavel? Trustee Laskin?
Present.
Trustee Lee?
I'm here.
Trustee Lalka? Well, I'll put a C. Trustee McLean?
Present.
Trustee Mamaliti?
Here.
Trustee Boyce is absent. Trustee Nanziata.
I'm here.
Trustee Patel.
I'm here.
Trustee Pilkey.
I'm here.
Trustee Rajakulasingam. Trustee Rajakulasingam. Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Swishkandaraja. Trustee Swishkandaraja. Trustee Story.
Here.
Trustee Tonks.
I'm present.
Trustee
Twitter
Wall.
is just blowing up. Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with Twitter and everything.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and I'm not seeing anybody else listed. Oh, hold on, let me check. No, I'm not seeing any other people who are wishing to ask questions or make comments. So we will then open the vote on this one, and this is for recorded vote. And we can do this by e-scribe.
Yes, please, Mr. Chair.
Because it does indicate who voted for and against.
Mr. Chair, my scribe is not open. I am in favor. Trustee Laskin.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin.
I'm also in favor. Trustee Joslin, I don't have a scribe today.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if we're going to do this here, I need to record the votes. So if we could please ask, let's do it, not using e-scribe.
Yeah.
Do it. Thank you. So if I could call the names out if you do not mind, because I have the list here.
Oh, and sorry, just so you know, Trustee Gill has indicated she's here.
Thank you. So if we could start with Trustee McLean.
I vote no.
Trustee Mamaliti.
I also vote no.
Trustee Toms. Trustee Toms. Trustee Laskin.
Yes.
Tonks, I'm in support.
Trustee Brown.
No.
Trustee Doyle. In favor. Trustee Arts.
I believe we're 3-3 right now.
Favor. In favor. Thank you. Trustee Carnival.
We didn't have him on the list.
Alvotum is absent.
Yes.
Trustee Wong.
I'm voting no.
Trustee Swishkandaraja.
He had her as not present.
Okay. Trustee Rajakulasingam. I think he was absent.
Yeah, yes.
Trustee Patel.
Trustee
Trustee Smith.
5-4.
Sorry.
6-4 for no's.
Trustee Story. In favor.
6-5.
Trustee Lee.
in favor.
6-6.
Trustee Chinnislin.
In favor.
7-6.
Trustee Donaldson. In favor.
8-6.
Trustee Nunziata.
In favor.
9-6.
Trustee
I think
Gill.
it's passed. I think it's passed.
I vote no.
Trustee Pilkey.
9-7.
In favor.
10-7.
Trustee Moyes. Trustee Moyes is absent.
10-7.
Did I miss anyone?
Okay, so she's not going to be censored.
If anyone's been missed, can you just let us know?
A 10-7 vote, if my numbers are correct.
So far.
1 second, Mr. Chair.
Well, but if this doesn't pass, it's all over. If this motion passes, there's nothing left. She can't be censored. The motion carries.
Okay.
Can we put that on the screen?
Okay, let's see if we can get Michael
All
on.
right, so it has carried, and that means then that issue of a code breach has been rejected.
Michael!
I'm here.
Have you been watching with
Okay,
us?
Michael.
Thank you very much. So in
You
that
heard the
case,
vote.
Yes, I did.
we have determined that
Okay. Okay, so Michael, give your feedback to the
we're not really in a
viewers.
position to
Well,
sanction.
first of all, my apologies. I wasn't on the set earlier because I was watching the
Okay,
proceedings
now
very carefully.
the next opportunity is Trustee Chernow-Slynn. I think you indicated that you had a motion that you would like to move.
I would. Thank you very much. As I stated earlier this evening, I really believe that the Integrity Commissioner's report raised serious issues. And as such, I believe it is incumbent upon us to see a way forward. And I do believe that way forward is through education. We are in the business of educating students, and we need to ensure that we are best placed to do that and to create the spaces to have these kind of discussions. And so I would ask that Ms. Joseph Bowers pull up my motion, which is called Combating Hate and Promoting Understanding.
And do you have a seconder for this as well?
I don't think this has anything to do with what we're talking about. Maybe we can turn that down.
Yeah, Trustee Mammalini in a second. Thank you, Trustee Mammalini. Vice Chair Mammalini.
There we go.
It's a bit of a long motion.
Sorry, before you continue, Trustee Chernow-Slynn, this was.
Okay. Whew, what a night.
Yes, it's been a very exciting night.
Yeah, let me just.
And
Hey, Michael, a question before you start. The chair of the board began the meeting wearing a keffiyeh. He then was alerted to the fact that he was wearing a keffiyeh, and then he came back without the keffiyeh and wore something completely different, put on glasses, straightened his hair, did a whole changeover midway through. I found his wearing a keffiyeh to be prejudicial. I found his wearing a keffiyeh to be threatening towards those of us who are Israeli. You see the keffiyeh as a symbol of Palestinian terrorism and Palestinian actions. And I wonder what kind of complaint can be made against the chair of the board for showing up to a meeting in which he was going to censure a Jewish trustee for setting up against anti-Semitism by wearing a keffiyeh right at the beginning.
Well, I thought it was also a bit provocative. I wasn't quite sure what was his rationale for that particular sartorial choice and what message he was trying to convey. But he has the right to wear what he wants at the meeting, as does any trustee. And that's essentially a political issue. If anyone has a complaint against the chair of the board for wearing his choice of clothing, then they can address that at the next election. And perhaps there ought to be some serious thought as to who the good people of Toronto want to have as their school president.
This is just the absurdity of it all. So she's going to get censured about something she didn't put into her tweet that they believed she should have put in. But he can wear whatever he wants, which is prejudicial to begin with. But that's okay because he's wearing it.
Well, maybe they should have been criticizing some of the trustees for not wearing certain clothes.
But I'm just saying the lunacy of this all, for him to show up with a keffiyeh, as a Jew and as Israeli.
I think it might have been a political stunt to try and sway people.
Yeah. So you're being prejudicial. You're trying to sway people to vote one way or the other.
To be honest, he's not under an obligation to be neutral. He's only under an obligation to be fair as the chairman. And I didn't think that he was swaying the proceedings through his conduct as chair. He wasn't trying to skewer a motion or prevent a trustee from being heard or prevent a motion from being presented. If the head in front of his offending was wearing that article of clothing, then there's not much to be done for it. But I think there are much more germane issues to be addressed if I could. Sure. And that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about was Zakir Patel, who was a bit of a piece of work, harping on about the code of conduct, but he didn't discuss exactly what the violation of the code of conduct was. All I kept hearing was code of conduct, as if it was 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. I think that it was Trustee Laskin who very presciently pointed out that there was no actual violation of the code of conduct. And this is a point I've been trying to make, is that if there were, let's say there were a violation of a code of conduct, it's not Trustee Lolka's violation. The violation was Mr. de Vilens, because he was the one who put those links into his materials. It wasn't Trustee Local who put them in. It was only Trustee Local who called them out. Now, when it comes to being balanced, I was thinking about this, and the way I look at it is, consider a glass of tomato juice, 300 milliliters, and there are mixed into the tomato juice 3 grams of warfarin, rat poison, enough to kill a hippopotamus. Now, if you were to describe that glass, what would you describe the contents of the glass? What would you describe it as? Poison. Now, measured by weight, measured by volume, 99% of it is tomato juice. Delicious, nutritious vitamins, minerals, just packed through and through. But if you drink it, you'll die. So the appropriate way to characterize that contents of that glass is poison. And to say, well, some of it is poison. Well, the some part of it that's poison is the part that actually makes the entire glass poisonous. That's what makes drinking the entire glass fatal. So if you look at the materials that Mr. de Villa put out, and I don't think that the rest of the materials were innocuous for that matter, but let's assume that they are. Let's take the most charitable interpretation possible of Mr. de Villa's material. 99% of it was pro-Palestinian. It was skewed against Israel, was biased against Israel, but it wasn't capital A anti-Semitic, and it wasn't capital P pro-terrorism. The argument maybe can't be made that 99% of it was, but 1% of it undoubtedly was. But it's not about a way of just weighing 99% versus 1% and saying the 99% wins. Sometimes the 1% wins. And in this case, the 1% wins, and which makes it completely appropriate to characterize the entire materials as being tainted and therefore poisonous. It's not out of order for Trustee Local to have said that. And that's the essence of the debate about her Twitter message. Was it fundamentally accurate? Did she fundamentally mischaracterize the materials? Because that's what she was accused of doing, fundamentally mischaracterizing the equivalents. So if she didn't mischaracterize the equivalents and the materials, then there was no possible grounds for a violation of the code. Now, Trustee Laskin also made some points during the hearing, and I have to be careful about what I say here. So I'll let people draw their own inferences about the process. The report of the Integrity Commissioner was based, with regards to the live count, the only live count before the board, on the report of the independent investigator, which is a law firm made up of 2 people. But one of those 2 people we know virtually nothing about, so we can't say anything about that. The other individual, it's pretty obvious that individual has an extensive history on Twitter. Anybody wants to look up their name is posted in the Integrity Commissioner's report on page 20 at the bottom, and you can look at her Twitter history, and you can decide for yourself about that individual's impartiality. I'm not going to offer an opinion on that. Look at her materials, scroll down, take a look, and you decide for yourself as to what you think as to whether she was the ideal candidate to fill that role of investigation.
Michael, let me just add something for the viewers, that if they went onto the CJA account, for instance, Center for Israel and Jewish
on that very issue,
they posted screenshots from her Twitter account of likes, that she is liking tweets that reference PFLP, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, as being not so bad, and that Israel is terrible. There's a lot of tweets that she has liked that are very disturbing, that CJA has reposted. So anyone could go up and look at what CJA has reposted for this so-called impartial investigator.
Well, I'm not going to make any comments about that directly, but what I will say is that in the context of conducting an investigation, it's essential that the investigator not be visibly partial, that they do not have a background that causes a reasonable apprehension that they're biased. Because you can't be, I don't know who plays soccer or does tennis or anything like that, but you know that players can't be refs and refs can't be players.
Right, exactly.
And you can't be a ref on Monday and a player on Tuesday, and vice versa. You have to just pick a role. 99% of us are players. You're
Hey,
a player,
I'm
I'm
a
a player.
podcast tonight, but tomorrow I'm operating early in the morning, so I need to go.
Okay, bye-bye.
So, but the question is,
Okay, so let's wrap it up. We had the vote.
Okay.
It was good for the community, but it does show that there's terrible winds of anti-Semitism going on. We just had this vote with the TDSB. Thank God.
It was a close vote. It was a close vote.
That's right. It was close. We had the statement from University of Toronto earlier today that they rejected the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Very disturbing, very troubling. As David Schoen was talking about it earlier, how pervasive this anti-Semitism is. And listen, I want to thank everybody for coming on, helping. We've been on for a while. It's been since, we were on really from 7 o'clock.
3 hours and 32 seconds.
We started at 7:30.
Right.
You probably set a record.
Right.
Exactly. And there's still a lot of people with us.
We've been on for
watching.
3 hours and 42 seconds.
Yes.
I'm glad I ate before the show. Something, anyways.
Right.
Good night, gents.
Gentlemen, this was great. I have to say, Mayor, this was wonderful to watch, the proceedings and how democracy actually works. Watching how the Toronto School Board, actually goes through its exercises. I'm glad it was a 10-5 vote, and we keep on fighting.
Indeed. Okay, guys, we'll talk
Have a good
tomorrow.
night.
Thanks
For
for
sure.
all your help getting the show going and for the, stuff you sent me, the videos and the memes and everything else. I think it went good. Guys, we'll talk to you tomorrow. And again, thank God someone was watching, because this could have certainly gone the other way.
Absolutely. I'm going to raise a glass just like Mayor just did.
Me too. Okay, let's see. Do I have a glass? No, I'll have to wait till I get home. Okay, guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye.